What is that noise?
The AC.
Squeaky. Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of you powerful devs out there. What's a powerful dev, they ask? Actually, they didn't ask, but I'm going to tell you anyway. These are powerful devs, are devs of all kinds of walks of life. So you could be a low-code dev, a pro-code dev, a no-code dev, a medium code dev, right?
I'm kind of a medium code dev.
Medium code dev, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Greg and I are both powerful devs. You are all powerful devs, and we cannot wait to share with you so many powerful devs things today. I'm one of your hosts, Donna Sarkar. I currently lead the Accessibility Tech program for Microsoft. I am a classically trained C++ developer, but nowadays I pretty much only use the Power Platform.
Absolutely, I'm the same way. I'm
Yes.
Greg Hurlman. I'm a senior software engineer on our Power Platform Customer Advisory team, which is kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
So we call ourselves Power Cat. We help our customers be more successful, figure out how to use the Power Platform in the most powerful ways, kind of like we're going to be showing you today, to help meld that kind of like low code, pro code, get that all united together the way it should be.
Right. So we have a very exciting show for you today, covering all of the parts of the Power Platform, not all of the parts, many parts of the Power Platform. And a lot of the demos you're going to see will be done in pairs, because we believe in this concept, like Greg's mentioning, about fusion teams. This is where devs, all kinds of devs, powerful devs, low code, pro code, all of it, plus IT folk and business experts come together to solve business problems. And as we were just talking about, it's not necessarily like team, you report to a manager. It's kind of project-based.
Yeah, it's a bunch of people that come together to get a project done. We're not all reporting to one person, but maybe we have somebody from HR, so because they live that work, they know what they need, they know what they're fighting with and how they're trying to solve it. And then we have our developers to actually do the thing, and maybe we have our pro code folks to maybe add some controls or get some data, and then our low code folks to build the apps and build some of the automations to make it all flow together.
Right. So I have a secret agenda for this conference. Do not tell my boss, but I have a fusion team. I lead a fusion team. We have, in accessibility space, right? Deep technical experts in the space, folks who know IT really well, and people like myself who know a little about code. So we're building a product. And I'm here taking copious notes today on things that we should keep in mind as we build this product. Again, hi Jenny, you don't know about the product yet, but maybe we'll have something to show at the end of this conference.
I know I'm going to be learning a lot. There's so much going on all the time on the Power Platform, all sorts of new things. I'm on that team, and I still need to catch up. So I'm really looking forward to everything, especially with some of these first sessions we've got coming along today. We're going to be starting with Charles Samana, my boss, the VP for the Business Applications Platform here at Microsoft, the big boss for the Power Platform, to talk about all the stuff we've been working on.
Yes, but then you got to stay tuned, because the real boss, April Dunham, who leads the Power Platform Advocacy team and is the sponsor for this wonderful conference, she's up second talking to our friend, community member Scott Duro. But these two sessions will really kick off and set the tone for the entire day. We'll see you in a bit.
Hello everyone, my name is Charles Lamana, Corporate Vice President of Business Applications and Platforms here at Microsoft, and I'm incredibly excited to welcome you to Powerful Devs 2023. One of the most important things when we talk about Power Platform and low-code development is what it means for professional developers, and you are exactly the right audience, and this is exactly the right content to make that a reality. And the reason that we're so excited about this is because every developer is dealing with a growing backlog, a growing workload. It needs to find ways to go faster. And the good news is, low-code turbocharges your development potential, makes you build apps and solutions and workflows and use AI faster than ever before. And when I talked about that growing backlog, let's put some numbers on it. There's over 500 million new applications that need to be built in the next 2 years. That's more than all the apps built in the last 40 years. That is a staggeringly large number, and is a challenge for all of us that are building software to go build the solutions at the pace that businesses and users require. And compounding the fact is that even if we wanted to grow our teams to have more developers contributing to these projects, there's a 4 million developer shortfall in the Americas alone. So huge developer demand, not enough developers to build it. That's pressure on all of our shoulders to go create these solutions in new and interesting ways. And that is where the Power Platform comes in. Whether you're no code or low code, or if you like pro code, like to write in Visual Studio, everybody can use the Power Platform to build solutions faster than ever before. Whether it's analyzing and reporting data through Power BI, or building web and mobile applications with PowerApps, or creating workflow and robotic process automation through Power Automate, creating chatbots and conversational experiences in Power Virtual Agent, and last but not least, using Power Pages to build business websites, you can build solutions that are enterprise grade with low-code tools faster than any other really option out there. And of course, underpinning all of the Power Platform are three of my favorite components out there: Dataverse for your low-code data platform and data needs, AI Builder for accelerated and low-code AI capabilities, and PowerFX as everybody's favorite low-code expression language. Together, this is something really special, and we see this quickly becoming the common way of building solutions in the enterprise. In fact, Gartner has said that 70% of new applications will be developed through low-code or no-code technologies in the enterprise by 2025. And this isn't because there's going to be a bunch of business users only using the tool. It's because IT and pro devs are also going to use these tools to build solutions faster than ever. In fact, over 25% of Power Platform developers are classically trained professional developer or IT professionals. So a really interesting transformation that we've seen, and that is on a big number. There is over 7.4 million developers using the Power Platform every single month. This is a massive, in fact, one of the most massive developer communities in the world, and it didn't even exist 5 years ago. Great users and great developers like yourself have picked up these tools and built solutions and helped teach and grow an amazing community around the Power Platform. And although 7.4 million is a big number, it's just the beginning. Like I said, the developer shortfall is getting worse and worse. There's more and more need to build these solutions, and the only way we can do it is if we not only go faster using these tools, but teach and grow a whole new cohort of developers to leverage low code and create amazing solutions. And up to this point, I've been all about talking about Power Platform, all about low code. But low code doesn't exist in a vacuum. In fact, it's part of one of the most amazing developer tool chains out there. Here at Microsoft, that's GitHub for source control and CI/CD, Azure for hosting your solutions and your infrastructure and platform components, Visual Studio for where developers actually write code, as well as the Power Platform as the no-code, low-code way to create great solutions. It's not either or. It's not Azure or Power Platform. It's not Visual Studio or Power Platform. All of the amazing announcements and all the amazing features I'm going to talk about today, and you'll hear throughout the event, will show how these things go great together. From low code all the way to backing Kubernetes clusters and REST-based APIs and big data lakes through Azure Synapse, you can do it in one integrated environment. The idea is that if you use pro code and low code together, there are no limits to what you can build, and there's no limits to how fast you can build it. From Azure Data Services to Azure Compute to Power Platform on top, you can easily leverage all the right tools for the right job. You can use Power Platform at the top to compose solutions and microservices. Then you can drop down lower into the stack when you need to write code, when you need the extra control. And of course, all of that can be managed in GitHub and with customization through Visual Studio. This picture has a lot of logos on it, but it's because there's a lot of power, a lot of potential, a lot of capability when you start to paint the picture of your solution by using all the colors on this palette. That is what's so exciting about Power Platform right now. And that's why I am so happy that Power Platform and Azure and all these other dev tools all sit in one group at Microsoft. We all work together in this group and making sure that we're building that next generation developer tools and capabilities, and a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different perspectives, but it all comes together to make developers more efficient. And to provide some reinforcements to those developers, we like to talk about this really new emerging concept called fusion teams. What a fusion team is, for folks that haven't heard about it before, is this idea of professional developers, business analysts, and IT admins collaborating on a single project. The idea being, if you like to write code, you can write code. But if someone else from the business, say in the sales department or the finance department or the marketing department, wants to do some customization and visualization on top of it, they can do it by leveraging your assets, by bringing everybody into the fold, underneath the tent to create these solutions. You draw from the strengths of all these different types of users. And this idea of fusion teams will increasingly be a major component of how enterprise applications are developed. And if we look at Microsoft's rich history with .NET and SQL Server and more, you can see that business application, enterprise application development is one of the most common use cases. So low code and fusion teams are two newer concepts, but two essential concepts to be a productive and efficient enterprise application developer. And like any other developer presentation, don't just take my word for it. Don't just look at the slides that I'm going to run through. Let's actually take a look at a real hands-on demo and see the Power Platform in action.
How many of us here have updated our internet provider in the last 3 years? We all know how time-consuming and stressful changing providers can be. Imagine making that kind of change as a large business. The stress is multiplied by 1,000. But Lumen, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the US, found a better way to manage complex change. They decided to use Power Platform to build a solution. In the beginning, the reaction from many pro developers at Lumen was, low code is a black box, and I know I will hit a wall at some point. Well, today, I will share with you the story of how pro devs at Lumen embraced the Power Platform and became huge advocates for low code along the way. Lumen's original process involved capturing customer information in a mass of offline documents and spreadsheets. The drag-and-drop nature of PowerApps and its fast deployment capabilities enabled pro devs at Lumen to put together not just a prototype, but a working solution extremely rapidly so that they could invest time right from the beginning on more complex requirements. First, Lumen devs decided to add a new column that calculates the day since a project started. PowerApps Studio enables editing this data table without ever having to leave the app. What's more, this inline editing experience does not compromise the dev team's ability to extend this app and truly customize it with code. In fact, Power Platform is open by design to allow all layers of apps to be extended with code, be it front-end, back-end, database, or integration. Let's see this in action. We click Edit Columns to launch the table editor, where we can see and update the data in the table. We can also add and edit any of the columns in this table schema. We create a formula column and use PowerFX to define it. Here we can see handy syntax coloring, completion, and inline error descriptions as we build the formula. Once this is ready, we save it and the new column is added to the table and computed for every row. Now let's take a look at cards. Cards is a brand new feature of PowerApps to create tiny, task-specific apps that are used from right within a team's chat. When a new migration is approved, a Power Automate flow is kicked off, and the migration team receives this card in Teams. As you can see, the card presents them with the deal context and the ability to choose which team member to assign to lead the migration. There's no need to wait on details from the sales team or to have to switch to a different app to get context. The relevant info is right there where the migration team works, right in Teams. So you're probably wondering, how was this card built? Historically, if I wanted to build interactive, visual, and data-driven cards or UIs and show them in Teams, I'd have to cover several key requirements, including knowing the data schema of how the data is stored so I can query it, how to handle input validation if I have input form fields, and of course, making sure the card is only accessible by those who should have access to it with the proper security. PowerApps does all of this for me. I start off in this low-code designer with handy data connectors, including Dataverse, which we're using as the source of truth for this migration. I can quickly design the card layout and pull in the right data. I use PowerFX to power this Assign Project Manager button. The best part about this is that I still have full control of the card's behavior through this JSON view right here. This is very useful to me because I want to manipulate or transform the JSON string of all the project migration details retrieved by the Show Details button. Also using PowerApps, I use parse.json to parse the string into a JSON object, turning it into an easy-to-understand table. And just like that, this card is ready to go. With that, Lumen now has an app, some automation, and a card. The final piece that remains for this migration process is how customers will engage with the company to stay up to date about their request. The team decides that a site is the best way to do this, so they use Power Pages to build one. They start off by designing the Power Pages Maker Studio. Here, it's so easy to simply drag and drop content like Power BI dashboards and surveys. But guess what? Just like the rest of the Power Platform, ProDevs can easily make more advanced customizations. From the Maker Studio, I jump straight into something I am very comfortable with, VS Code. Right here, I click this button to edit and code, and with one click, I am presented with a new tab running vscode.dev, a lightweight version of VS Code in the browser. Now we're talking my language. I don't need to download any tools, and I can fine-tune the layout by working with the page's underlying HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. In this example, I want to display FAQs coming dynamically from a Dataverse table. And since I need to handle multiple platforms, web, desktop, hybrid, mobile, iOS, Android, I want to make sure the FAQs look amazing everywhere. So I make some code changes directly in this page, sync them, and they're reflected in the Maker Studio immediately. Being able to develop business solutions quickly and still knowing I can jump into the code where I need to makes this a great development experience. We've seen today how Lumen has been able to build a world-class migration process that stops that feeling of, we're changing internet providers right in its tracks. ProDevs can easily extend Power Platform with rich tooling, which makes for a true no-cliffs app development and automation experience. Best of all is that all this power is available to you today.
And as we saw in that demo with Lumen, it's incredible what's possible when you draw from all the different elements of the Power Platform. Whether it's interactive, collaborative experiences through things like cards to external-facing websites, you can stitch it all together and get more value, more solution built in less time. And this is something that so many of our customers are using. In fact, over 97% of the Fortune 500 uses the Power Platform today. So a lot of adoption and a lot of usage. And although there's so many companies and so many users on the Power Platform today, we are not resting. We are eagerly innovating and building new solutions based on great feedback from users like you about where we can improve and enhance the experience as needed. One of the most exciting things that we announced last fall was co-authoring. One of the biggest concerns we heard from developers who were embracing things like PowerApps is that it was a challenge to have multiple users develop solutions at the same time. However, with co-authoring, it's now possible so that multiple users can make changes on screens, on logic, on customizations, on API calls at the same time. And you can do this in a purely visual-based experience, just like you would inside of PowerPoint or Excel. And you can also do it in a way that it syncs back to a Git repo so you can run full source control and CI/CD on top of it. So no matter which angle you want to take, maybe for a little bit of innovation doing it in the graphical user interface on co-authoring, and then maybe for what gets checked into the repo you use Git, that is something that you have the flexibility to do with PowerApps in this amazing new co-authoring capability. And what we've heard and what we've seen is that this type of collaboration is expected from our users. You see it inside of Office, you see it inside of Visual Studio, you see it inside of Canva or Figma. Every modern application has this rich collaboration, and that's why we've brought this real-time co-presence and real-time collaboration backed by source control to PowerApps in the Power Platform. And this type of collaboration makes it easier for you to work with other devs on your team, but also to take advantage of those fusion teams that I mentioned, where you have business users and IT professionals contributing with the professional developer in a single solution. Now, to get back to the heart of this session, and that is the fact that Power Platform loves to support professional developers and to make them more efficient. And we have released an amazing amount of capability since we last came together for Powerful Devs. You can see it across CI/CD, pipelines, onboarding, and code-first experiences. I'll have a few examples and micro demos of these things, but it's just amazing how much new functionality is out there. If you are a developer, you have first-class enablement in the Power Platform. We have GitHub Actions, we have Azure DevOps Actions, both of which are generally available and ready to support your entire software development lifecycle. We also have built-in configuration-only, low-code-based developer pipelines for building and publishing to production, to pre-production, or user acceptance testing. And they can be triggered from code-based environments, whether it's CLI or API or inside of Visual Studio. So that same type of easy experience you're used to, building UIs and workflows and visualization reports in the Power Platform, you can bring to building that dev pipeline. Additionally, to get onboarded, we heard the request to enable a developer environment, and we did just that. You can now use Power Platform developer licenses, so anybody in the company can get started at no cost and use these capabilities to test and experiment and learn. And last but not least, code-first experiences. We kept hearing the request to be able to peek behind the Power Platform solutions and look at the actual source, have something that you can do a diff with and check in to GitHub or elsewhere. And we now have done that consistently throughout the Power Platform, where you can see and edit and tweak and customize from inside of a text-based IDE all these great capabilities. And one of the things that we also took to general availability last year, so that as you onboard and you do your CI/CD and you do your development and you bring teams together and you have your pipeline, is to also provide new ways and new options to purchase Power Platform, which match what developers already know and love. And what we announced is you can now use a pay-as-you-go option in your Azure subscription for PowerApps, Power Automate, and Power BI, and maybe some more are coming soon, where you can easily use and build solutions, and as they are consumed and as they provide value, only then do you actually have to pay for it. And this works right inside that Azure subscription the same way every other Azure service works. If you want to do alerting and monitoring on Azure billing resources, you can do that. If you want to use this as part of your existing Azure agreement, you can do that. It's a low commitment, easy way to mix and match these resources, because we recognize, and as a developer in a past life, I recognize that you really don't want to think about billing and purchasing when you build these solutions. But the reality is, if you're mixing and matching databases and storage and Synapse together with a Power App, you want it all to be managed and configured and build back the same way. So in addition to that billing component, and I hinted at this earlier, we've done a lot to expose YAML files which map to PowerApps, so you can actually check these into your repo and you can do diffs and you can easily spot different components and controls, in addition to open sourcing the PowerFX expression language. That way you can have the same type of expectations for these low-code solutions that you do for your pro-code solutions. You're not having to go only through a graphical user interface to look at changes that happened, but instead can drop in and use the same type of tools that you already know and love. And this makes things like a pull request feel really natural, even if you're building a very complex Canvas app in PowerApps. So this is something that I'd say the really experienced Power Platform users are really probably energized about as we continue to make improvements here, because it makes it easier and easier for you to treat this as a true ProDev artifact. And pipelines. Pipelines are core to every developer's workflow. And when I say pipeline, I'm talking about how do you go from check-in to test to deploy to roll out worldwide. And what Power Platform pipelines enable is an integrated experience inside of the Power Platform user experience and configuration options associated with environments that reduces friction and creates more visibility around changes and how they progress from dev to test to prod. And this allows you to do things like validate dependencies, run solution checkers, run app checkers, run flow checkers to make sure that you have the high quality that you expect before you push Power Platform solutions to production and to your users. And this is something that we all are familiar with as a developer, but something that wasn't as first class in the Power Platform in the past. So this really is part of changing the model to run mission critical solutions through the Power Platform. And as these solutions get built, they of course generate a ton of data, which hopefully is stored inside of Dataverse. And if you do use Dataverse, Synapse Link is now enabled. It reached general availability at Ignite near the end of 2022. So you can now have a simple and easy configuration to enable near real-time replication from your Dataverse backend all the way into Azure Synapse. This makes it so that just like how you can configure SQL or Cosmos DB for Synapse Link, you can do the same thing from the Power Platform. And what we're seeing a lot of our customers do is you may have many different Dataverse instances as part of many different solutions, but you want to export that data to Azure Synapse so you can very easily generate reports across those Dataverse instances and get insights and even do machine learning across all those different applications and solutions. That is easier than it's ever been in the past because of Synapse Link. And the reality is we think just about every data service is going to need to have easy integration with Synapse because that is the center of analytics and intelligence in the Azure cloud. And that's when Dataverse is a great resource for operational and reporting and visualization, but it's not a full intelligent data platform, which Synapse enables. So this allows you to very easily mix and match and bring together the ProDev and low-code artifacts and assets. And this is an important bit that I mentioned earlier, this idea that it's never about being Azure or Power Platform. It's not about Synapse or Dataverse. It's about both of them together, making a solution better and built faster than in the past. And one of the things that we really focused on too is making it easier to go from the visual representation to the pro code representation in the Visual Studio tools you already know and love. So if we look at Power Pages, you can see here there's a small little screen showing how you can edit code as a first-class button right inside of the Power Pages user interface. And what that will do is it'll actually open the code behind that visualization you see right inside of code space. So even in the same browser session, you're able to see all the different HTML, the additional templating or TypeScript or CSS that's powering that experience. And this ability to go back and forth seamlessly from visual representation to codeful representation and back and forth, we've enabled for the first time inside of Power Pages, but it's something we intend to bring to all of the Power Platform. The idea being we don't want to have a big separation and a big wall between how you do visual coding and visual development against that codeful development and codeful processes. So this idea of code behind, it's not something new. It's been around in many different UI in the past, all the way back to Visual Basic, say, inside of Excel, or things like ASP.NET in the past, brings it all together now inside the Power Platform. And we've talked about how you build the solutions, how you deploy the solutions, how you manage the data of the solutions. But on day 100 or day 1000 after you build a solution, monitoring is everything. You need the ability to see what's happening inside of your application or your workflow, where there are failures, what performance looks like, where you have unhandled exceptions, and more. And with our Azure App Insights integration, you can very easily export telemetry and insights from Canvas applications, model-driven applications, Dataverse, and more. And we really view Azure App Insights as that central place for application level monitoring. And instead of creating a different way or a whole new way of doing it inside of Power Platform, we're using the tool that developers are already familiar with. So all the rules, data integrations, and triggers that you're used to, those will also work in the case based on the telemetry generated by the Power Platform. And we've done the work to expose all the right hooks and the easy configuration to make that more straightforward than having to add trace and log statements all over the place. So something that's really helped evolve and grow over time to cover a much broader section of the Power Platform. And as people use the Power Platform, one of the things that we see being really key and as to why it helps developers go faster is the built-in integration capabilities for the Power Platform. There are over 900 data connectors available to SQL, to AWS, to Snowflake, to Oracle, to ServiceNow, to you name it. You probably can easily leverage it and integrate those systems into your Power Platform solutions. And how many developers want to spend all their time doing data integration between all the existing enterprise systems? Not many. Instead, you'd rather want to spend your time building logic, using machine learning models, building your end-to-end services, and Power Platform makes that very easy to reach out and integrate with the bigger IT landscape without being stuck spending your entire day or month or sprint doing data integration. And one place where we've really pulled ahead and done a lot of work of those 900 connectors is around SAP. We've now released SAP connectors and templates which support many different SAP versions, topologies, and authentication models. These connectors and templates also bundle up low-level primitives like BAPI calls and more to create higher-level constructs around business logic and business events. This makes it so if you have to build an enterprise application solution or workflow which integrates back to the SAP instance that's running at the heart of your company's business, you can do it. And you can spend most of your time building your app, not integrating your app. And SAP is one of the areas where we heard a lot of requests, and for professional developers out there, one of the things which really helped accelerate how they can deliver value in core operations and core processes at work. And the reason this is important is every single company, every single customer that we work with is trying to find ways to be more efficient and to do more things in less time. In the broader, I think, challenges we're all going through to create solutions in a world where I'd say there's broad macroeconomic uniqueness. Now, for one of my favorite things is what AI means for the Power Platform and how AI is really changing the game in terms of how quickly we can build. Folks probably know ChatGPT and all the other OpenAI-based large models that you've probably seen, like DALL-E and others. And what we've seen is that we can take this AI capabilities and actually create a co-pilot-like model where you're going to go from AI being kind of lightweight integration for people to people being increasingly supervisors and editors around AI. And a great example of that inside of the Power Platform is Power Automate AI Copilot. This uses the same large language models that power GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT. It's GPT 3.5 and Codex, so it makes it possible for you to just describe in natural language, in a sentence, what you want to happen, and we will build the first scaffolding and templating of that automation. So even if it's complex with conditionals and loops and multiple actions, you can just describe it and it will automatically create it and bring you to the Power Automate Visual Designer to customize and tailor as needed. We've seen that this already, for users who have adopted this since it rolled out a few months ago, a 50% reduction in development time. It doesn't replace development, it doesn't replace low-code development or pro-code development, but it gets you there faster. And that's what we're seeing across the board. All this amazing AI innovation is all about making you more productive and more efficient. And this is one of the things that's just the beginning of a ton of amazing innovation around AI in the Power Platform that you're going to see over the course of the next few months. And that's something that we think is going to be very, very exciting, because these types of innovations are going to start to reimagine and recreate so much of what's done in these development environments. And the reason it's being enabled is because of these large language models. These big transformer AI models are going to really define how we do development over the next decade, where we're going to increasingly go from a model of people working side by side, like that collaboration example I shared earlier. So say a team of humans working on a project, to a team of humans working on a project alongside with AI. AI that helps coach them, makes suggestions, does token completion, and will generate artifacts just based on natural language. This is an exciting transformation. This is a once in 20 years types transformation. And we think that Power Platform and users and developers on the Power Platform are incredibly well positioned to capitalize on this change to become even more efficient and even more powerful as a developer. And for those who are new to the Power Platform, and maybe this is the first time you've heard about some of these things, the biggest thing I would say is please get started today. Go check us out, aka.ms/lowcode, and you can be building your first app, your first workflow, your first dashboard in just the next hour or two. It's that easy to get started, and almost like any other dev tool out there, there's no better way to learn more about it than to get hands-on. So definitely check it out. And for those who have been using the Power Platform for a while and are checking out these sessions for some updates and some new insights, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for using our products. Thank you for giving us great feedback. And thank you for being part of one of my favorite communities I've ever worked with across Microsoft, because there's so much energy, so much passion, and I'm always blown away by what everybody builds. Thank you for having me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome to our session on So You've Been Told to Use Low Code, Now What? My name's April Dunham, and I'm a Principal Cloud Advocate here at Microsoft.
Hey, and I'm Scott Giroux, and I'm a Solution Architect and Microsoft MVP.
All right, so Scott and I are going to be talking to you all today about this question here. So you've been told to use low code, but I'm a pro coder, so now what? So that's the most common question that we see here is, a lot of times you might get kind of thrown into the wonderful world of the Power Platform here. So how do you actually get started? Now what do we do? And that's the question that we're going to be tackling today. We have myself, we have Scott here, who's an expert. We've both been doing the no-code, low-code space and come from pro developer backgrounds as well. So we're going to be talking you through some of these key aspects here, starting with, if we go over here to the first question that I really wanted to tackle that you might be wondering is, why would I use the Power Platform instead of using my existing software development techniques?
Am I allowed to say this is a question I ask myself a lot?
I think we've all been there. Everyone that has went from the pro code side to the Power Platform side has all asked this question.
Yeah, it is kind of a loaded question, and but I really don't think it can be an either-or thing. I don't think it's a binary thing, because the worry is, and I had the same challenge when I first started with low code, coming from a very strong pro code background. I started to ask myself, okay, well, what about performance, and what about the control I have over the various different aspects of software development? And now I work with teams where I'm trying to find that perfect balance as far as I can. I mean, I don't think there really is a perfect balance to find that, where we're using the ideal amount of low code and the ideal amount of pro code. What we want to try and do is we want to find a way of getting as far as we possibly can with low code. I mean, Microsoft talk about no cliffs. Unless your name happens to be Cliff, of course. But it's like, well, you get to the point where you've pushed that low code platform as far as you possibly can. And then you can start to use your other software development tools like C# and TypeScript. And I think that's the point here, is that these are all tools that we bring to the table in software development. But I think also, perhaps more importantly, using the Power Platform means at the beginning of that software development cycle. And I think this is quite different to the way that perhaps you would do software development in a more traditional way. Early on, you can do a lot more, deliver functionality and get a lot more user interaction, and perhaps people who are not pro coders can actually, you can start to collaborate a lot earlier on. And of course, the quicker you can do that, the better decisions you can make in that software development lifecycle. So yeah, I think really the reason why is that it can speed it up, and also it can mean that it's a lot more of a collaborative process.
Yeah, and I think when we get to the question of like, when should I use, like pro code versus no code, low code, code first and all that. I mean, it's not often people think it's an either or. And I think that's the point that we hope to get across today is it's not an either or scenario. You can use both together and they work well that way together as well. So maybe it makes sense if we kind of start with what's just a general overview of what do we even have here with the Power Platform, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got so many different tools now, and the Power Platform seems to be expanding on almost like a weekly basis, and you get new functionality coming out, and then new areas of low code development. And over time we have that low code replacing where you traditionally you needed to write pro code, but it's very much this layering, because I mean the Power Platform is all built on the various different aspects of Azure, and so you can still deliver all of those microservices and integrate with legacy systems, and so you can then still create an application that doesn't necessarily have to have this sort of big bang approach. You can incrementally replace that functionality that you perhaps is entirely pro code gradually with all these different low code tools, and then using Azure you can then still integrate where you need.
Yeah, like this is that you mentioned no cliffs experience. I mean, this is exactly it. We have this base set of products with the Power Platform to be able to do no code, low code development from, mobile applications to automation and chatbots and all that stuff. And, sometimes you feel like you're kind of stuck within the bounds of that, but with these integration points that you're seeing here with Azure and other things, really able to push those limits of what's possible out of the box.
Yeah, and an example of that would be using Azure to expose like an Azure function, any API, and then you can use Visual Studio to develop that, like the traditional tools that you're used to using, and then you can then consume that inside the Power Platform and create reusable components, and that's what allows this collaboration really, because once you've created these reusable, composable elements that then exist in your kind of ecosystem. I mean, that's the buzzword, right? Ecosystem. Everyone's talking about ecosystems now, but I mean, that's what we're doing is we're creating those reusable components that can be then consumed and discovered by both other pro coders as well as low code makers.
Yeah, I mean, so many things we can do. We'll see more sessions later on today too about this pattern of integrating your backend APIs with the Power Platform. Now, the next big question though that I would like to pose to you, and everyone's probably wondering, is what really makes the Power Platform different from low-code tools in the past? So we've all been there. We know low-code itself is not a new concept. I know myself, I come from a SharePoint development background, so I've used InfoPath, SharePoint Designer. Those were low-code tools. So what really sets the Power Platform apart and makes it different than low-code tools of the past?
Yeah, well, I think that obviously collaboration probably is the biggest element there. I mean, where you can co-author with other people who don't have necessarily the same skill sets as yourself. But I mean, yeah, we've been there in the software development world. We've been through it. We've been through so many different raisings of level abstraction. We right back from machine code, assembly language to machine code, and then you going into sort of third generation languages like C, C++, Java, Visual Basic, that enabled you to create applications a lot easier with less knowledge of how the underlying platform works. But still, you do need to have a degree of knowledge, and you need to do a lot more things like memory management and things like that. And then obviously we then had the next shift, which was like fourth generation languages, which, all the different builders that you could build off a database, and you could create forms and things like that. So we've had this constant raising in levels of abstraction, but I think what's really different this time is that there's a lot more focus on the management and the administration and the governance, because of course it's all in the cloud. So we can share services a lot easier. We can see which services are being used, and the Power Platform has got security built in. It's got it baked in right from the beginning, and so all of these things that previously we had to manage, like let's just take deploying things, where if you were doing a SQL database deployment, you had to manage the difference in the scripts. You had to work out what changes were needed to be applied to your database, and then go and create that script, and then manage the versioning and things like that. So that created quite an overhead, and it was very easy to underestimate the impact of that, even with fourth generation languages. And so with this next level up in abstraction, not only we've got all those benefits of the increased level of abstraction, we've also got all the better visibility, management, and governance. And and that, I constantly see that, and I'm sort of have to pinch myself, because it's like, wow, compared to what this used to be like, this is so much easier. And I think, well, maybe is it a little bit too good to be true? What's the catch here?
Yeah, it's. I think that's, again, you hit the nail on the head of what really sets it apart. It's very feature rich. It's scalable. Lots we can do from an ALM standpoint, and all that, which of course we'll see more later on today. Now, so we kind of see like the breadth of what we can do to extend the Power Platform a bit, just given all the solutions, and maybe get a better feel now for why we might work with it, and this concept of, we get like a scalable team as well. So like what we were looking at earlier with that IT pros and code first developers, and then citizen developers or low code developers, whatever you want to call them, being able to work together to build these solutions, really being able to have an extended team in a way too. So I guess that leads me to my next question then, that you might be wondering is, will using the Power Platform make development faster if we use that?
Yes. Well, I did say that, right? Didn't I? I think I did say
I mean, I think I've heard you say that. So, like how exactly
this has been recorded, it's like, oh dear. Yeah, I mean, I don't say that flippantly, all right? I don't think I can say that just off the cuff. I think it does have to be somewhat of a promise of the Power Platform. If you do adopt low code tools, then it does increase your development. And I think one of the things about low code is that it's certainly not low complexity. I mean, that's one of the keys here, is that often applications are very complicated, and there's lots of complicated business rules that you have to implement, potentially very complicated flows, user interfaces, and things like that. So it's not really about simplifying, the application overall and making it less complex. It's really about dealing with a lot of the things that would normally take a lot of time up front. I mean, we talk about plumbing in software development, or boilerplate code, or things, but basically it's the stuff that ProDevs, myself included, we really just don't like doing. It's not a kind of an enjoyable thing, because it's very repetitive. It's things that you do over and over again. And one of the principles of software development, well, one of the many principles is dry. Don't repeat yourself. And so, there's security, there's network management, there's asynchronous task management, offline syncing, making your application work on a mobile device. And so the Power Platform really does a lot of that for you, builds all of that plumbing. I mean, not least that when we were talking about managing microservices and connecting via custom connectors in the Power Platform, again, that does a lot of that management for you once you've exposed your service. So, once you remove all of that boilerplate, that plumbing, then, you also got the opportunities where there's a lot less breaking changes. I mean, I sometimes dread that email that you see in the morning where it says, oh, there's a vulnerability that's been detected in one of your libraries that you're using, and you have to go in and you obviously have to update that library to the latest version, and that might be some breaking changes. It may mean that you've got a lot of regression testing to do. And the awesome thing about the Power Platform is that Microsoft largely handle that for you. So you don't really need to get into this management of all the different dependent libraries. And so, yeah, I think that, I mean, I mentioned plumbing. I mean, did I mention plumbing? Less plumbing? Yeah, I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge for me. And I think that really does speed up the overall development. So you can get that application out there a lot quicker and get people to give you feedback.
Yeah, and I think that, everything that you just said kind of touches on a few things. Like if we show the control versus responsibility, so we have a slide that we show there where it kind of has a graph where it shows, responsibility versus control and where the Power Platform fits in. So I think this touches on a lot of what you said. So obviously custom dev having the most control over that, but that's the most responsibility as well. Package app being at the other end, and then PowerApps nicely there in the middles.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, technical debt is probably one of the biggest words you hear in software development. If you listen to any meeting, any Scrum, any stand up or anything, any software development related management, you will hear technical debt all the time. And it's a problem that we've always had. And the more features that you create, the more code you've got to maintain, the more regression testing you've got to do. So it means that the available time you've got to create new features goes down, and especially as applications progress, sometimes even the development teams shrink. So anything that can do to reduce the amount of things that you need to maintain will give you more time to focus on more features and making your overall application better.
Exactly. So I say we move on to the big question though here, and that's, how do we actually extend this thing? So we talked about all the great, it's going to save us time. We're bought into the low code now. Now, how do we actually go and work with it and use our code first tools to extend it?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, to me, one of the special parts of the Power Platform. And I think it really does separate it apart from, other low code platforms, is that not only can you extend it by adding on external services, you can add on functionality inside the Power Platform. You can actually augment functionality that then basically will be part of the out-of-the-box functionality, and then it's usable by low code makers, functional consultants, or even other pro developers. So you can see here there's all of these different aspects of the Power Platform. So like C#, Dataverse, pipeline plugins, you can actually create C# code, which then runs inside a pipeline. So when a request comes in, and that can be from a Power App, it can be from a flow, it can be some external API call, then we can then intercept that call, and we can put code inside that pipeline so that it can perform logic, it can do validations, it can create other records. And really what's so special about it is that it actually then exists inside the transaction. So if you do something like creating other records, you can actually roll that back, and so that it becomes much more atomic. And that's very special. But obviously there are low code alternatives coming out for that as well. But if you do need to get to that point, you can do it. And the same with C#, Dataverse, custom APIs, it's kind of the same principle. What you're doing is you're creating functionality that looks like it's native Dataverse. So you've got a normal standard call that's been made to Dataverse to do all of the standard out-of-the-box functionality, and then you've got external clients, PowerApps, flows, etc., making these additional calls to an extended API that you can create yourself. So it's almost like you're making Azure functions internally within inside Dataverse. I mean, it's not exactly like that, right? But that's kind of what you're creating. You're creating these little units of work. And the virtual tables, I love the fact that virtual tables are getting so much goodness and so much attention at the moment, because what we're seeing is that you can sort of attach these external data sources, so that as far as anything that's interacting with Dataverse, it kind of looks like it's actually part of a standard table. You would create normal tables, and this is great because you don't have to then pull in that data externally. You can just sort of connect to legacy systems or existing systems, like an ERP system that you just don't want to duplicate that system, but you do want to use that inside a Power App in a much more consistent way alongside your standard Dataverse. And then also you might want to sort of gradually migrate a legacy system. And so this kind of gives you that opportunity. And there's all these out of the box providers. And now there's this fantastic wizard that just allows you to then go in and just sort of, with a few clicks, you can go and bring in some data from SharePoint, bring in SharePoint lists, or you can connect to SQL Server and you can bring in tables so that then, they're just existing there inside your Dataverse alongside all the rest of the data. And then a part that's really close to my own heart, which is the PCF, the PowerApps Component Framework, creating these reusable components. Again, that's really the component-based architecture of the Power Platform is huge for me. And so once you publish these components that sort of extending the user interface, that means that then you can have makers just using those components as though they were just part of the standard PowerApps user interface. So you've got consistency of user interface, but you've also then maybe got additional functionality like, some complicated graphs, or maybe some map services, or some complex data grids. And actually, the Creator Kit from PowerCat is a great example of that, where it bridges the gaps between the fluent UI that you get in Office and SharePoint, all these kind of areas that Microsoft are using the fluent UI, and then it brings those controls inside PowerApps so you can quickly visualize really quite complicated tabular data, etc. So yeah, I mean, it's there's all these areas, and like Power Pages, which is obviously a really exciting new part of the Power Platform. There's all of these areas that we've got inside Power Pages, which make it very easy to create external facing applications. So you've got external users or even internal users just interacting, but not necessarily needing to use an internal Power app, a custom page, or a Canvas app. And so what we can do is we can use a sort of the content management out of the box, but we can also create this additional JavaScript, TypeScript, HTML, CSS functionality inside our Power Pages, which then interacts with Dataverse alongside all of the standard out of the box functionality. So, it's like the possibilities are endless to extend Power Pages. You can create something that just doesn't look at all like the templates that you might get just by, dragging controls using those standard data controls. And then lastly, custom connectors. And this is fantastic because it really does open up a whole world of things that in the past were very complicated to do, because in the past, if you wanted to integrate to external systems with things like the Dynamics CRM, and before that, in the dim and distant history when we used to extend what its Dataverse is called now, but it would be very difficult. You would have to do things like having batch imports and exports, and you'd have to have C# plugins calling external services, and it all started to get very complicated and hard to maintain. But now with custom connectors, it's just great. We could just call external services that are exposed through RESTful APIs and use low-code tools to interact with those services.
Yeah, I mean, wow, that was a lightning round of like all the integration and extension possibilities there. Everything from backend, which you just touched on with custom connectors, to front end with PCF controls. And these are for whether you're a .NET dev, whether you're a JavaScript dev, React. There's all kinds of ways so that you can integrate with the Power Platform here. Now, one of the things that I personally love about it too is that we can use the developer tools that we're already in to extend the Power Platform. We can do that natively within the tools that we're used to using, like things like Visual Studio in VS Code. So I think you have a demo maybe in place with us showing us how we can integrate with the Power Platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just switch over to that. So I wanted to show really an example of that what I was just saying about being able to call a custom connector and connect to any external services. But what I really wanted to also show is exactly as you were saying, how you can use development tools that we're used to using, on a day-to-day basis. And of course, Visual Studio is really where that's at. And so if I open up Visual Studio here and go and create a new application, I'm going to use ASP.NET Core Web API here, and they're going to go and just call this weather, and I'm going to just create that in the standard location and just accept all the defaults. And what we're going to do is we're going to expose our weather API and use that inside PowerApps using a custom connector. So if I create this, it will then go and create my project for me. And if I come into PowerApps and go into Dataverse, what I can see is I can see my custom connectors area. And my custom connectors area here is empty. There are so many different ways of creating custom connectors. It's amazing. I mean, obviously I can publish to Azure and I can put it into Azure API management, and I can kind of export it from there. I can go and create new custom connector here, and I can go and go and say import it from all these different places. I can even import it directly from Azure itself. I mean, that's pretty awesome. It's in its own right. But if I go and look at my application that's been created here, my .NET Web API, and look at the program, it's nicely created for me. It's very simple. I mean, this is just the boilerplate stuff you get when you create a .NET Web API, and it's just going to give me a random weather forecast, which I have to say is probably what happens. I think the weather forecast where I've moved to Canada, I think is pretty much random compared to what it used to be in the UK. But what's awesome about this is that I can come into my if I go into my overview page and I go to connected services here, what I can do is I can add a service dependency, and I can type in Power Platform here, and there we go. We've now got actually a Power Platform service reference that I can add in here. So if I click next, I can now give it all of the information that I need to connect directly to Power Platform right from inside Visual Studio. And I certainly found that in the past, I always thought that maybe, the Power Platform was somewhat separate to Visual Studio. It was Azure was a lot closer to Visual Studio, but what we're seeing now is the Power Platform is just kind of in parallel with Azure. It's a service that we can connect to directly. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually going to use a dev tunnel. And what this means is that I'm going to be able to connect to my local machine directly from the Power Platform. So if I go next, it's going to go and create all the necessary configuration so that when I deploy this, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and click run. What it will do is it's going to create a connector inside the Power Platform where I just connected to. And so that means that if I come over into Power Apps here and make sure that I'm in the right, so I need to, yes, tell it that I can connect to my dev tunnel, which is good. And then if I go to my custom connectors and make sure I'm in the right environment, which I wasn't, so that wouldn't have seen. Good job I checked that. It would have made the demo quite short. So if you go to custom connectors here, and okay, there we go. I mean, weather _ connector. It would have been nice to show you that it was empty first. I mean, it looks like it's something up my sleeve.
I trust
right?
you. Yeah.
It did look like it was something up my sleeves. However, this is what's so cool about it, right? There's no host here. There's absolutely nothing. There's no base URL. And so for those of you who've created custom connectors, you'll know that that's a bit weird. Well, what exactly is going on there? And so if I go over to test, and I go and say, right, come down to my test operation. Well, firstly, what I need to do is, first thing I need to do is go and create a connection to that. So here we go, new connection, and then create that. So it's just going to authenticate me against that connector. So now when I come back into that connector and go down to test like that, I can now click test operation, and it should now give me There we go. It should give me all of the different temperatures. But that's just to show what's going on here. If I go into my program here and go into my weather forecast service, and I put a breakpoint here, let's just see what happens now. So let's go back to my connector and go test operation. Look at that. It's actually now gone, and because what it's done is it's actually connected through that dev tunnel, and it's now allowing me to debug that connector.
Wow, I love that demo. It really shows the full breadth of what we can do here with extending the Power Platform, staying in our developer tooling like Visual Studio, having it actually go and integrate with our backend services by creating that custom connector, and even having that debugging real time with that tunnel there. So that was a really cool demo. Thanks for showing that off, Scott.
No problem.
Yeah. All right. So why don't you say we leave everyone with some resources here? We've shown a lot today about how to extend the Power Platform. So lots to learn and wrap your mind around. We do have some developer documentation there. So there's a short link if you go to aka.ms/pp/dev. That's basically going to be kind of a one-stop shop to see everything you need to know about developing on top of the Power Platform. And then this event, the Powerful Devs Conference, is actually going alongside the Low Code February event. So this is a month-long, for the whole entire month of February, event where we have daily blogs and workshops and things like that to learn about what we're talking about today, extending the Power Platform with your code first skills. So if you want to take part of that, we have a Cloud Skills Challenge that goes along with that as well that you can complete and just learn more about everything that we're talking about here. And if you want to get started, if you're inspired by what we showed today and you want to get your hands on it and see what you can do, best way to get started is to sign up for a PowerApps developer plan. So that gives you a free developer environment that you can go and start testing some of these functionality that we showed you today. So hopefully that gives you everything that you need to get started. Thank you so much for watching our session.
Thanks, April.
Man, that was really just blew my mind. Seeing that debugging just works. I mean, this is just the developer in me. Anytime something is just easy, straightforward, and seeing it all just integrate with that Power Platform is just amazing to me. And then really having to work with low code is just a way for us to get our work done quickly, get that project out, move on to the next thing, and just keep that backlog small. Very important. But really, we saw so much that's going on with Charles, seeing all these apps that need to be built, more than we've ever done like in the last 30 years, we need to do in the next 5 years. And the more we can do to really just make that easy, make it successful, is where we want to be. But first, right now, what I want to do is dive a little deeper into what we can do with Power Pages as a professional developers. And so we have a principal PM from Power Pages, my friend Sandeep, to show us how it's done.
Thank you, Greg. Hello and welcome to the session Pro Development with Power Pages. I'm Sandeep Dhanrajani, Product Manager on the Power Pages team. First, about the product. Microsoft Power Pages is a secure, low-code SaaS platform for creating external-facing business websites. You can get started quickly by creating modern sites and customize them to your needs without code or with code, some of the techniques that you'll be seeing today in this session. Power Pages supports website development by Fusion teams that comprise of members of all tech fluencies. On the tech fluency spectrum, if you see, we support the needs of business users who want to create sites in a no-code WYSIWYG way to the IT pros and site admins who would want to administer and govern their site using configuration and settings. And all the way to the other end of the spectrum, we support the needs of the professional web developers who would want to extend Power Pages sites by writing code to meet the complex business requirements that their use cases demand. In this diagram, I would like to summarize and show you in a glance options that our makers and developers have when it comes to developing with Power Pages. First of all, let's look at some of the low-code, no-code options where you can get started quickly creating a site, creating the content for your web pages, creating and managing your web pages, the sitemap, choosing your core styling themes, configuring your authentication and authorization, multilingual support, content snippets, site settings, etc. Also, you can quickly configure forms and lists over data, and Power Pages does support multi-step forms as well. And also in a low-code way, you could be configuring your web roles, table permissions, because Power Pages supports the role-based access control mechanisms. In terms of the integrations as well, Power Pages integrates natively with Power Virtual Agents for creating chatbots, embedding Power BI reports, other Microsoft products like SharePoint, Azure AD B2C, and also you could leverage the native integration between Dataverse and Power Automate to trigger actions as cloud flows. Now, coming to the pro development options, really. Pro developers can now extend custom, create custom front-end UI and code using JavaScript, HTML, CSS, etc. They can create, custom page layouts and style sheets. Power Pages supports Bootstrap as a styling framework, and also create some custom data presentation, use bound or unbound PCF or code components to represent or override your field controls on the form, use dataset controls for grids or galleries use cases, and also like developers can leverage the liquid code support that Power Pages provides for reading data from Dataverse. And if you have to really build complex integrations, you could also leverage the web APIs that Power Pages support to query your Dataverse data securely. In this segment, last but not the least, is you can also use the Dataverse extensibility options in terms of plugins and processes, and also the virtual table support, which allows you to query data from other sources and show them in Dataverse and also in Power Pages. Now, before we see some examples for ProDev extensibility, let's take a look at first how Power Pages promotes developer productivity. Power Pages supports the Power Platform command line interface, using which you can download your website code locally, and then using Visual Studio Code, you can edit that in the VS Code itself. But what we have recently launched, and I'll show you just in a bit now, is the Power Pages Studio integration with the Visual Studio Code for web. So with zero install, VS Code footprint, and from the studio itself, you can invoke Visual Studio Code for web editor and get into editing the source code of the page, its header, and other files. Once done, you can save and sync all your updates, and then you can view them within the studio or browse them on your site real time. Now we'll look at some practical examples of how you can use these tools to build rich experiences and implement your advanced business scenarios. Pages supports code components that allows you to create your own rich custom controls or use some of the out-of-the-box rich controls. In this example, you can actually have a list on a Power Pages site represented as an editable grid using the PowerApps native editable grid control. And you can give all of that functionality to your Power Pages site users. You can also extend and create your own controls or use some out-of-the-box controls like rich text editor for your command, comments, prompts, description, details, etc. Another advantage of code components is reusability. As you can see in this example, a signature control built as a code component works equally well on a Power Pages site and a PowerApps model-driven app. The benefit with Power Pages code extensibility is that developers can use familiar languages and frameworks such as HTML, CSS, Power Pages support Bootstrap, as I said before, JavaScript, liquid templating, web APIs, everything you should already be aware of. Here's an example of data being read on a form. I'll just quickly show you the code. Here, Power Pages supports the open source liquid templating language, and it gives you objects from Dataverse that you can securely read data from and show them on your form. For example, here, we are using that to query data from Dataverse and show it on the form section for the first name, last name, and the other user details. Or implementing form and page behaviors as well can easily be done. Here, you can use client scripts to fill data, show hide fields, make them read only, and that's allowed on the form or on the whole web page as well. And then you can always create your own custom experiences that interact with data in Dataverse using the web APIs that Power Pages provides. I have to highlight that web APIs not only honor the page's role-based access control mechanism, but also provides much granular control in terms of security. So at a record level, you can control the permissions like create, read, update, delete, and also you can control the columns on which that's allowed. And then, last but not the least, PowerPages fully supports the build and deploy phases of a typical DevOps lifecycle. You can source control your website customizations, configurations, either in GitHub or Azure DevOps, and then create CI/CD pipelines, which is continuous integration, continuous deployment pipelines with Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions to automate your builds. Some of this information is more in detail available on our Learn documentation. So yeah, so that was a quick overview about PowerPages Pro development options, and I would encourage you to deep dive into PowerPages, other capabilities and ProDev capabilities on our Learn site. With that, I'll hand it over to Greg for the next segment. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandeep. That's all really great information about what we can do with PowerPages. But let's keep those hits on coming. Later on, we're going to see how we can make our UI really shine with some custom front-end components. But first, we're going to look at getting all our data from our custom APIs into PowerApps or the rest of the Power Platform with custom connectors. Nitya and Daniel, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nitya Narasimhan, and I'm super excited to be joining all of you at the Powerful Devs Conference. And I'm here with
Daniel Laskowitz, and I'm also really excited to be here. Today, we are going to talk about enabling millions of low-code developers by building custom connectors. But before we start and talk about that, first we need to introduce ourselves. So Nitya, please take it away.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. I'm joining you from wintry New York. I'm a cloud advocate on the JavaScript advocacy team at Microsoft. And I'm here because I work with JavaScript, mobile, and web development. And I really wanted to know how folks like me could help support the low-code ecosystem.
Yeah, you sure can help us there. And my name is Daniel Laskowitz, and I'm a senior cloud advocate on the Power Platform. So I work with the Power Platform for a long time already. I have been working with Microsoft for half a year, but before that, I've been working for almost 7 years with the Power Platform. So I have lots of experience there. And I kind of represent the low-code side of things, and Nitya is here to talk about the pro-code side of things. So we try to help each other as much as possible. But before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about the agenda.
Woohoo!
Yeah. So the agenda for today, we already had our introduction. We are going to talk about our scenario that we want to show you. And because of that scenario, we should talk about connectors, because that's a big part of our scenario. And because we are going to talk about that, we'll talk about the types of connectors. We're going to do a demo of custom connectors, and we are going to explain the independent publisher connectors, which is one of the types of connectors. And after that, when we have built our connector, we also want to create something with that connector. And that's why we want to build a front end. And we are going to use the creator kit for that. And then we are going to demo the Power App that we built with that as well. And to wrap it all up, we are also going to talk about some resources so that you can look at the resources that we give you, and you can even do it yourself later on. So without further ado, let's move on to the scenario.
So yeah, when you came to me and said, hey, there are things you could do as a JavaScript developer, the first thing I wanted to know is, I have the scenario I wanted to activate for the longest time. So you know that Azure has a publication on dev.to, right? Turns out dev.to has an API, and we always wanted to have a dashboard inside our organization where we can kind of get to see all the posts that have been made by everyone in the Azure org, all the advocates. So Daniel, is that something we could do?
Yeah, we can create all kinds of connectors. We can create them whenever you have a REST API, you can actually create a connector for that. So that's really cool.
What's a custom connector? I noticed that you said it would be a custom connector.
Yeah, a custom connector is one of the types of the connectors. We have a bunch of out-of-the-box connectors. And that's something that's really cool because whenever you go to the Power Platform, you have a couple of products. You have Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents, and Power Pages.
Wait. Are you telling me if I build a connector once, I can use it with all these products?
You can use it with Power Automate, Power Apps, and Logic Apps. So it's even a part of Azure that you also can use with this. And that's really cool. Yeah, and within the Power Platform, there are already more than 900 out-of-the-box connectors available. So you can see a small list of them at the bottom of this slide. So you can, for instance, see Salesforce, SQL Server, SharePoint. There are a bunch of data sources that you can use here. But if your connector is not available, you can, of course, build a custom connector. And that's what we want, right?
Yeah, so I believe they don't have a dev.to connector in there. So what you're saying is if we have an API, we could build it ourselves, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and the custom connectors are built based on OpenAI v2. So that's something that you should be aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one thing that you should know. But yeah, it's something that's really cool. So to talk a little bit more about the types of connectors, because you were already asking, what is a custom connector? Well, a custom connector is basically what you always use as a start for also the other connectors, because you need to build a custom connector first. And that's a connector that's available in one Power Platform environment in your company tenant. And when you have that, you can edit your connector, you can add operations, you can add responses, requests, etc. And it has to be deployed through a solution by using application lifecycle management.
That's
or you can do it manually as well.
Nice, but tell me more about this certified connector, because I think now I understand what custom does, but what certified mean?
Yeah, certified is really, really interesting when there is, for instance, a company that has an API and they want to make it possible for people who use the Power Platform to automate their service. So imagine dev.to would, for instance, create their own custom connector, and they want to certify that and make it possible for everyone that uses the Power Platform to use their connector.
But I don't work for dev.to. Can I still create a custom connector?
No, and that's the beauty of independent publisher connectors. And those give you the possibility to create a connector for almost every service around the world. Of course, we still have legal, etc. So it should be legal to use it. So that's one check that you need to do. But the really big advantage of using a certified connector or independent publisher connector is that you don't have to deploy it. It's automatically available because it becomes one of the 900 plus connectors that you already have.
Oh,
and that's something that's really cool.
Yeah, so if I understand this right, if I were to build a custom connector as a ProDev, Microsoft can help manage the deployment of it for me so I can make it available to all these folks who want to use it without having to do any extra work.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And it's still safe as well, because when you create a custom connector, your admin, of course, wants to manage it as well. So when they see a custom connector that they don't want to see within their environment, they can still block it. So that's something that you should be aware of.
So what are we going to do next?
Yeah, so next we are going to talk about building the connector, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, and in this case, we are going to use the Maker portal. That's what it's called in the Power Platform. And we are going to show you a custom connector, how you can use the UI to build one. So let's switch to the demo environment that I have.
And so just to clarify, this would be the first step if I want to build a dev.to custom connector. My first step would be to go over here, right? To the
awesome. Yeah, so you can go to make.powerapps.com or make.powerautomate.com. And when you are logged in, you can see your own icon at the top right corner so that you are logged in. And then you have a navigation here. And that's where you can start building. So that's the easy part, how you can get started. And it's really good to start with solutions. That's basically the most important part, because when you want to create a custom connector, a solution is kind of a bucket which you can use to use the application lifecycle management. So it's easier to move all the custom connectors plus a Power App that we're going to create later together in one bucket. And that's why solutions are there. And I already created a solution. a dev.to solution. And there is a Canvas app, which we are going to show later, and the custom connector.
So just to ask you
yeah.
a question on this, I remember you saying that we can build connectors for logic apps, we can build connectors for Automate, etc. I could actually build additional apps and add them into the same solution, and everyone would be able to find them, right?
Yeah, so whenever you have multiple apps, for instance, and multiple custom connectors, you can put them all in one solution and then move them from A to B, for instance, if you want to.
This is
So
awesome.
it's really
this is
easy
very
to
like
do that.
package management in our ecosystem. So great, thank you.
Yeah, and in this case, if you look at the parts of the solution, we of course have a custom connector and the Canvas app. But whenever we would certify our connector, we don't need the custom connector anymore because it's automatically on there already. So that's also a really big advantage of using a certified connector or an independent publisher connector. Yeah, before we move into our connector, we of course need to show the API that we're going to use.
Yeah, and I remember you saying Open API version 2, you said, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So when we open up the API, we can see that we have a Open API specification here. You can download that, of course. And I believe this is a YAML file. I don't know if it's version 2. You tested it?
Yeah, I think it's version 3. It's a YAML file and it's version 3. And they actually have 2 APIs, this version and another one, which is the newer one. But yeah. So how do we kind of use it if it's in version 3? Is it possible to still build a connector?
Yeah, so I would normally convert that to a V2 version and then import it. But to really know a little bit more about the API, I usually start from scratch and then I'll build it on top of all these parts that I can see here. So what you can see here,
the fact that we have the Open API specification actually helps us because you can copy paste some of the metadata for requests and all from here when you're building it.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah, and what's also really cool here is that, of course, there are some descriptions, etc., that you can reuse within your connector because sometimes you have to describe a certain property that you get back or a query parameter, and it's really good to look at all that documentation to move on. So what we can see here is, for instance, that if we want to get articles, we have a URL here, dev.to/API/articles. And when I go to my custom connector, and this is the edit screen of my connector that I already built, we can see already that parts of it are available here because you can see here a host name and a base URL.
Nice.
And those are dev.to/API.
Okay, so this general tab is where I would fill in the metadata for my application that I'm building. Like if I had an icon that I want to put, all of those stuff, I would fill it in here. And the two main things I should check are the host and the base URL. Got it.
Yeah, correctly. And when you go to the next tab, for instance, there's security. And this is where you would enter if you have an API key or an OAuth 2 connection or something else. You can also do no authentication. So if it's anonymous, for instance, you can do that as well. There are a bunch of possibilities here, but this API uses an API key. So that's what we'll use here.
Yeah, this is actually cool because if people watch the session and want to go and build their own dev.to adapters or connectors, they could do it without, because dev.to does have some endpoints that don't need authentication. So they could try it without the API key and with.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then we'll move on to the meat of the connector, and that's the definition.
Yeah.
So that's where we define all the actions and the triggers that are part of the connector. In this case, we only have actions, and actions are basically the operations that you have. So it can be get articles or create an article or get my articles. There's a bunch of options in here. And again, we have a general card here, and that has a bunch of options here. So what you can see is that you have a summary, and that's the name that really pops up into your low-code development. So whenever you are looking for an action and you fill in get articles, this one should pop up. So that's something that's really cool.
So this helps me understand this better. So actions are any kind of request that go to the API. So we can actually create actions for any request, potentially even scoped, to various
Yeah.
parameters and things. Well, nice. Okay.
Correctly. Yeah, and the triggers are actually what kicks off a workflow, for instance. So that could be something like a webhook. So when a new article gets posted somewhere. So that's possible as well.
So triggers would help us actually create automated workflows that trigger this and then potentially get this data fed into. Hey, this is super cool.
Yeah, and this is only the first part because, of course, you have the general part where you can fill in summary, description, operation ID. But there's also a request part. That's, of course, the request that we do within this operation. And what's really cool here is that you can use a import from sample functionality.
Yes.
And this will save you a lot of time because in this case, you can use import from sample. And then you can just select the verb. So for instance, get. And then I can go back to the documentation and I can just copy the URL here.
Now I get it. So this is how you were able to build the dev.to connector, even though that was OpenAPI 3.0, because you could copy paste the content here and build it from scratch.
Yeah, correctly.
Nice.
Yeah, and there is, in this case, I'm using the normal URL, but there are a bunch of possibilities here because you have query parameters here in the operation, and you can have page per page, a tag, etc. And if I want to use those, I need to add them manually. So in this case, I need to add page is 1, for instance, and per page is maybe 30. And by entering these query parameters, it will automatically see that there are query parameters needed. And that's how you can use those and import them. But I already did that before. So all the query parameters are already in there. So you can see page, per page, etc. So I use that already. But that's only for our request. So then something comes back, of course.
Yeah. Hey, before you move on, though, I'm a ProDev, right? So I saw you had a Swagger editor. Can we just take a quick sneak peek at that? I want to know what that
sure.
does.
So the Swagger editor is where you can also see all the properties that are already in this connector, all the responses, all the requests. I can even fold it if I want to. You can see parameters here that we had. So the page per page are already in there. And that's also possible to do that within here.
Yeah, this is such a familiar look for folks who are working with OpenAPI. And what I'm understanding here is that you can edit in the definition tab or the Swagger tab, and they kept in sync. So whichever way you feel most comfortable, if you're a code first person, you can come and do it here and it'll still work.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that's how you can easily do that. But to finish it off, we also have the response, of course, and the response is whenever it comes back from the request, of course. So you always want to do something with the content that you get back from the API. So whenever we want to get all the articles, we maybe want to loop through all the articles and get the title of an article and the author, and then maybe put that in an email or do something with it at least. And that's why you want to have the response as well. So you can import from sample there as well. And the best APIs usually, just like this one, they have like, you can just use the sample, you can expand, you can copy it. And whenever you do that, you can just go back to your import from sample part, you can paste it, and you can hit import, and then it will get all the responses that you get.
Gotta love OpenAPI specs.
Yeah.
They give us everything. Yep, this is nice.
So that's really cool.
Yeah.
And whenever we are done with it, we can of course move on from the definition to the next part, and that's in this case code. We are not going to talk about that today, but there is a possibility to use custom code with custom connectors. And you can use C# code to use it within your custom connectors.
Yeah.
So that way you can transform or do stuff with your request and your responses.
I remember you showing me this, and I find this super interesting because this is almost like we have a place where we can intercept request responses, transform and enhance them the way we want before they get to and from the API to our kind of users, right? Like the places where we're using them. Yep. Very nice.
And the last part is maybe the most important part. So let me update it because I just changed a little bit with the import function.
You read my mind, though. I was like, hey, there are so many APIs, so many parameters. How do we even know that all the stuff we kind of handcrafted works? So this is cool.
Yeah, so what you need to do here is, we already have a connection here, but normally this would be gray when you start building your first connector. And then you need to add a new connection. And that new connection, that's something that the Power Platform actually needs, and Logic Apps as well, by the way, because there is an API key in this case, and we need to add our API key in there to create a connection. And that's what we already did. So it's already available here. I already entered our API key, and from there we can use all the query parameters here. So we have page 1 per page 30. And what we can do here is test operation. So we can see the response of all the articles that I'm getting back. But what you wanted was
I want to see all the articles from Azure.
Yeah, so let's try that. So we're going to use the username Azure.
Yes, I think the username is the org name, so that works. Yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, I can just hit the test operation button again. And then I can see that there is a article with Power BI Everywhere series.
Did you make this happen, that Power BI was the first response coming back?
No, it is
another Power Platforms advocate. Did you set this up?
No, it is actually my teammate, David.
Yes.
but I didn't set it up. But this is really cool. So we can see
really
here.
Cool.
Yeah,
we at least know that it's actually true. And there I see it. I see the username and the org name. Yep.
Yeah, so this is really cool. And with that, we are actually at the end of this demo, because we already have all the different actions in here. Let's move back to the slides.
So
and
just before you go, I want to quickly look at that screen. And I really like the fact that up top, we can see the entire flow. It's a 5-step process. We start from metadata, then we put our API key, we define everything. We can add translation stuff, transformation stuff if we want, then we test it. And at this point, we update the connector. It's all set to go, right? Everything is in this. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so that's really easy to use.
Yeah.
So let's move back and go to the presentation again.
And I think the next step, we also did this test part. So yay.
Yeah.
And I actually did want to say that what I remember you telling me is, once the connector is built, we can also test it in any one of those, like through Logic Apps or through, not just in that space, but we can go and test it with one of the user components.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about independent publisher connectors, because we already talked a bit about custom connectors. We already talked about certified connectors, but the independent publisher connectors, that's something that has been around now for almost 2 years, I believe. And it's really nice to have those, because those give you the possibility to create a connector for something that you are not part of. So if you are not an employee of for instance, Dev2, you can still create a connector there.
Got it.
So let's go step by step to the whole independent publisher connector. The whole way of creating one. So before you start building a connector, make sure your connector doesn't exist, because we don't want people to both create a connector and then one of them gets accepted and the other one already exists then. So make sure that you know that the connector doesn't exist. You can share your connector proposals. So whenever you want to create a Dev2 connector, you can already go to GitHub and create a pull request there, a draft pull request, for instance, and then you can create a proposal there, so that you kind of have a claim on the connector. And then you can build it, of course, just like I showed in the edit screen. You need to create a title. You need to write a description for your connector. You need to define all the summaries and the descriptions from all your actions, but also the query parameters and the responses. You also want to add metadata describing the connector and its end service. So we need a little bit of metadata around dev2 in that case. You need to prepare the connector artifacts. You need to submit your connector for deployment. And this will take a little bit of time because Microsoft will check if your connector is really working well, if all the different parts that are requested, if they are in there. And then they will certify it as well. That will take a couple of weeks as well. And then whenever it's certified, it will go on the deployment train, and that will take a little while before it's landed in every environment, because that's the deployment stage. And then we move on from there. And then
so the thing the thing I really like about this process is it's centered in GitHub. So because all the publisher connectors are in GitHub, so we can actually file the issue, and then we can keep tracking the conversation right on GitHub. And if someone else, like for example, now you're going to publish dev2, and I'm like, hey, I want to see something extra, I can literally come in and add to that discussion and try to make sure we're all like coalescing around one idea. That's great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that's everything about connectors. Let's move on with the front end, because whenever you have a connector, you of course want to do something with it. We can create PowerApps, which are applications, of course. We can create chatbots, which is Power Virtual Agents. We can do all kinds of things. In this case, we are going to build a Canvas app, which is a Power App. We are going to use components to speed up the development, because components are really easy to use. And there's a bunch of things that you want to reuse within apps, of course, like a menu, a search bar, maybe a table. And it can help a lot with speeding up your development. And of course, we want to use our custom connector to connect to dev2.
Yeah. So as a JavaScript developer, if you're on the JavaScript community, or if you're on any ProDev, I think those are the two things I took away. We can build connectors, and we can actually potentially build components or help people kind of jumpstart with template apps. Cool.
Yeah. So to create our app, we are going to use something called Creator Kit, which is available from Microsoft. And it's based on Fluent UI, which is a framework that Microsoft created. And it's also being used in all kinds of Office products. So for instance, in Teams, they use Fluent UI. In SharePoint, they use it. So whenever you use this, it can fit in there really, really easily. And there are a bunch of things already available here, like a table, a menu, a command bar, etc. So let's move on to the Power App that we created.
Wow, I can already see the list I asked for. I can see the article. This is amazing.
Yeah, so here I am in the PowerApps Maker Studio. And this is where we have all the objects that we have here in the app. And I already added all kinds of things, like I have a pivot, which is basically the place where we navigate from one to another. We have a search box. We have a command bar, which we don't see now, but I'm going to show you that in a little bit. We also have a grid where we have a table of all kinds of articles. So let's move on and just show it, because that's the easiest.
Yes.
So this is the preview mode of PowerApps. And here we can see that we have all kinds of articles in there.
So this one is using the articles endpoint, and I can see that you can select. So when you pick the Azure or .NET, you're effectively giving that as the parameter for the username, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So let me just select it, and it will show the little dots here, because it's now doing a call to dev2. And it also shows the Power BI Everywhere series here.
Yeah.
And Dave Taboo. which we just saw. So if I click on this, I need to use this one. I can select, for instance, the on select here. And what I can do here is I can expand the formulas, which we use in the low-code development environment. And what I can do here is whenever somebody clicked on Azure, for instance, it should do a call to dev2, get articles, and it uses the username Azure in here.
Yeah.
So that's what it actually does.
So this is pretty cool. And I think our session is almost at an end. So
yeah,
would people be kind of able to follow this up with resources?
Yeah, so let's move back to the slides for that, and move on to the resources.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, we have a bunch of resources here. We divided it in multiple parts. So the connectors are in there with all the links to the custom connectors. You can have documentation, coding standards, which are really, really helpful. A CLI where you can download the connector if you want to and put it in source control, for instance. There's also a part about the independent publisher certification part. And of course, the GitHub repo, which is really, really important because that's where everything starts. And of course, the PowerApps are in there as well. So you can go to the Canvas apps documentation and
This
the
is awesome.
Creator Kit documentation.
Yeah. So, but we're going to end with a shout out. If you go to the next slide, we're going to give a shout out to Low Code February. So if you want to go check this out, in week 2 of Low Code February, which is going on right now, we actually wrote up an article on this. So you can go read up, and we'll put all these resources there for you as well.
Yes. So with that, we are at the end of the session. And Nitya, thanks for helping me with this session. And I love the great idea with Dev2.
Yes.
And I can't wait for other people to build their own custom connectors as well and share them. Because I
Yes,
think
and we should
can
publish
see so
this and
many.
get people to contribute to it. This was amazing, and I can't wait for us to do more.
So, hello, welcome to the Powerful Dev Conference. My name is Diana Birkelbach. I'm a Microsoft MVP from Germany. I work for Orbis, where I got a chance to work with Dynamics CRM, Dynamics 365, Power Platform right from the beginning. And since the PCF were released, that's pretty much what I do all the day long. So when I talk about ProDev skills to power up the PowerApps front end, of course, I'm speaking about PCF. So what is PowerApps Component Framework? It's a framework for controls, which allows us to build PowerApps, and we can include them in model-driven apps, Canvas apps, and custom pages, and even in Power Pages. It's a ProDev way to use the same framework as the first-party controls. The PCFs are generic, and so they are reusable, and they have a great interaction with the platform. There are 2 types of PCFs. We have the field PCF and the dataset PCF. And when we talk about the structure of the PCF project, we will see that it includes the manifest, the resources, the features, and the implementation. But from the design point of view of the PCFs, I think the manifest is actually one of the most important because it defines all the parts which are included in the PCF. So we see the properties there, we see the resources like translation files or CSS files, and we also see the feature which are included like Web API. The implementation part of the PCFs will rely on model front-end technology. That includes Node.js, TypeScript, React, and of course Fluent UI, which is a great help to make the components we create look and feel like the other ones from the PowerApps. And of course, we cannot forget about Power Platform CLI, which we'll use because that allows us to create a PCF project and also to work with the components inside the environments. So when we speak about the implementation of the control, we will take care of the main methods we see there. So we have the init method, which will be called each time a component gets instantiated. We talk about update view, which is a very important method. This one will be called each time one property will change inside the platform. So each time something changes, the update view will be called again. If you want to change a value from inside the PCF and give it outside to the platform, we are going to call the notify output change. And when that's called, the platform will call the get outputs for us, and we have the chance to provide the new values for the platform. And of course, we have the destroy method. So that would be the init, update view, get outputs, and the destroy method. We also have 2 types of PCF implementation which we can choose from. We can use standard components, which means that we get basically some kind of div HTML component, which we can use, or we can choose the virtual component, which are in preview right now, but they offer much more possibilities because they offer us the way to use the React and Fluent UI right from the runtime. That leads to lightweight components because we don't have React inside each component. And also this improves the performance because we are included in the render process from the platform and are not separated from that. So speaking about the difference between standard and virtual component, the most important ones are inside the index.ts. So we can see that on the left side is a standard component, on the right side is a virtual component. And the main point, the main difference is the update view. Because on the left side, we don't have to provide anything back. And on the right side, we have to deliver a React element. That's why this element will be taken by the platform and included in the render process. So what is a field PCF? We can bind this field components to columns. We have them on model-driven forms or on Canvas apps, on custom pages, and it supports already a lot of data types like strings, numbers, dates, choices, and choice, lookup, but they are only the simple lookup until now. And let's see, I have an example of the first PCF I've made for a field PCF. Is the colorful option set, which I've included on the form. And there I can use the option set by providing an icon and the colors from the customizing. So there are a few examples here. And also another example, I can provide more icons for one component. And to implement that, have a look to my GitHub project. Did you know if you press dot, you will get that opened in a Visual Studio Code-like editor. And we can see here the manifest. So I have the name, I have the display name, and the parameter. So I have the option input that's bound to option set. So this one will be offered for the option set controls. I have the input for the icon, and I have the sort by parameter where I allow to sort the options based on the value or the text. So the maker can choose that. The implementation is not very hard. Inside the update view, we have only the render control. And there I can provide the parameters which I get directly from the context from the PCF. So I have the options input with all the options available there. I have the current value. And when the user picks to change an option, I'm gonna call this onChange function where I save this value and call the notify output change. This one will force the platform to call for me the get outputs where I can provide a new value. I won't go in much details, but I'll show you how I can use there the Fluent UI dropdown and the icon to represent it. So basically just return that dropdown and provide the options. For the customizing point of view, I have to define the colors for each option from the option set. And after that, I can go on the form, choose the control where I want to place it, and go to components, and then add the colorful option set there. And I can provide the icon name I want to use there and the value for sorting. So that would be a simple field PCF. Now let us talk about the second type of PCF. That would be the dataset PCF. They can be used both in model-driven apps and Canvas apps or custom pages. We can bind them on tables, on views, on subgrids, on model-driven app. And speaking in Canvas app or a custom page means we can bind them to tables, collections, or custom connectors, for instance. They can represent a grid, a map, could be a calendar control, or maybe a timeline. You have to choose there. So you have the freedom to choose there. And the dataset PCF will get the data from the platform. And that's very nice. And we also have the possibilities to work with this dataset and extend it. So we can implement the paging, we can change the sorting, we can link to related tables, add some filters, add more columns. We can edit and save the changes, and we can work with a ribbon. And for that, we can choose to select a record, or we are able to retrieve the commands and even execute that commands if you want to. As an example, I show you the colorful option set grid. So this time I have the same control, but rendered as a complete grid. So you can see it here. I can use the search and the view. I can change the view if I want to. If I select a record, I can work with a ribbon. I can make some paging available. I can change the sorting. And if I want to, I can go inside a row and edit right in line. And from the customizing point of view, I'm going to go to the table where I want to define this PCF. I go to the controls and I add one. And of course, I'm going to choose the colorful option set from the list. And there I can work with this option set. That's the property set where I'm allowed to define some properties, some columns from inside the table. I can define the other properties, for instance, if it's editable or not. From the implementation, it would be hard to go now in a lot of details, but I want to show you how easy it is to implement a dataset component using the Fluent UI details list. So for that, I go to inside the update view, and the component there, it's only using details list, where I have to provide the column and the items. So inside the component, I just have to take that columns, which I get from the dataset, sort them first, and then take the display name, the width of the column, which I get from the columns. For the items, I go through sorted record IDs, and for each of them, I'm gonna get the record from the dataset records. And for each column, I can get the formatted value of that records. And that's it. And when I use now npm start watch, I can start a harness, and I already see a grid, which is very much looking like a details list from all-driven apps. Now, the colorful option set grid, it's much more complicated. There are a lot of details there. I won't go in the details there, but you can see that I'm using their details list, where I also provide in the same way the items, the columns, selection, when it's an item invoked. But the most interesting part here, when I provide the columns, I have an option to provide there a render function. This one will be called when I render this colorful option set. So I have a control only for this color. Keep this in mind because we're going to see right away the same idea in another context. And that would be about PowerApps Grid Customizer Control. So there are a few special types of PCFs which we can use, and this one would be one of them. The PowerApps Grid, it's a control representing the next evolution of the PowerApps read-only grid control, allowing user to view, to open, and edit records from views and subgrids. This control will eventually replace all read-only and editable grids in model-driven apps. And what I'm very happy about, I can use it inside model-driven apps and even in Power Pages, and I have already now the infinite scrolling, the inline editing, I can define the colors, and even more. And there are a few features which are already announced, like grouping, aggregation, or nested grid, which I'm very much looking for. And when I'm talking about the customizer control, it's the option I have to specify the customizer control for this PowerApps grid. And that would be a PCF. It's some kind of field PCF, which is hosting inside the PowerApps grid. It's the same idea of cell render, which we can use for editor or for just for rendering, which you saw in the PowerApps grid. But the idea here is that I don't have to implement the whole grid. I let the hard work to the PowerApps grid, and I only implement this tiny control for this column. So let's first see how it's working. So I go to the table and I choose there also the control that would be the PowerApps grid. I have a lot of features there, like enabling the jump bar, the option set color, if it's editable or not. And when I have a look inside Dynamics, I can see this list. The colors are already shown. I have the option sets there. And if I've chosen to make it editable, I can edit right inside and also the options. But what if I want to change the look and feel of this technology code and I want to have it like my colorful option set from the form? I can implement that for PCF, and I have the update view, and the magic part is happening inside the init function here. I get the event name from the only property from the PCF, that's the event name, and using that, I'm able to register this render to the PowerApps grid. And let's see how this kind of cell render looks like. It's pretty easy. So for the option set, I'm going to provide here a div. I use an icon from the Fluent UI, specify the color and the icon name and the formatted value, which I can get from the parameters from the render cell. And also, if a cell is clicked, I can change the row in edit mode. If it's an edit cell, I can use the same control from the PowerApps grid, which from the form, which we already saw. We have all the options provided, and in case the value change, I can provide the value to the row where I'm already. So I've uploaded this control, and you see here the name. So we have the publisher prefix, we have the namespace and the name of the control, and that's exactly what I'm going to introduce here inside this configuration for the customizing control. And then I have to save and publish. And when I refresh now the grid, I see now the new control there. And I'm even able to use it as a drop-down and edit the values that will be saved inside the PowerApps grid. But we can use it also for some other use cases, like calculating some columns, in this case, a next appointment showing when there is a delay, and also some other use cases for retrieving related data. In this case, I've retrieved related users to this records, which wouldn't have been possible with a standard grid because that's a many-to-many relationship that cannot be included in one grid. So we can make a lot of magic there. But let us go back to the complete data set. If we have to implement that, we have the possibility to specify multiple data sets inside only one PCF. And when we use that inside model-driven apps, we have the possibility to choose there from a list of the views. That's much better than specifying some hard-coded fetch XML in some configuration files. The ribbon will apply for the first data set, but the second data set will provide me the data. And that's very nice in model-driven apps, but we can also use it, the same principle, so the same idea in Canvas app and custom pages. An example of that, it's the creator kit. The details list from the creator kit, it's doing the same. It's using two data sets. You know about creator kit. It's a wonderful set of components for Canvas app and custom pages. And it's looking a lot like model-driven apps, and I like them a lot. And that's what I'm going to show you. But for that, I'll implement a custom page where I retrieve the data using the Dataverse search. Dataverse search allowed me to define more specific search strings using search operators like plus for and, or minus for except, or pipe for or. And I'm going to show you how I did that. So first of all, if you want to search in a search string for a view for everything about sample, but not for coffee, that won't gonna work. But if I do it that inside the Dataverse search, I get the records. And that's great. And I can jump to the records for account or a contact, for instance. But I wanted to have it only for one table. So let the user search with less clicks. So implemented that with the Dataverse search. I won't gonna do that here because that's another chapter, but there's an API which I've used and implemented the custom connector for Dataverse search. And every time I change the string in the input, I'm gonna provide that for the Dataverse search and specify that I want only the accounts, and I'm gonna save that in a variable. Inside the so I'll show the records using the Fluent details list. And all I have to do there is to define the fields. So that's the fields I want to show. I also provide the records, which I'll take from the variable provided by the Dataverse connector return values. And I have there this second data set, and there I provide the columns. So I provide a column name, display name, and the width. And now I'm ready to go. I'm able to search for sample. And it works. I can see the records inside my custom page. But when you have to look to this Fluent details list, this column data set, so the second data set, it's very important because and very interesting actually, because it provides me a way to define more complex, or I can customize more how this table have to look. But if I make an international project, I'm gonna have to translate this display name. I also have to define this width. And actually, I've provided everything already inside the Dataverse search. So I thought that I could make a way to read that directly from the Dataverse search, which I did. Maybe it's possible to make it using low code, because there is a view I can retrieve that data, I can parse JSON, and I can loop through and maybe some other tricks to get a metadata. But for me, it was the point where it was getting too complicated. And what do you think I did? I did a PCF where I thought it was very easy to retrieve all that information. And for that, I've used another preview feature from the PCF where I can use the output objects and provide a schema for these output objects. I think it's a very powerful function. So I've implemented a PCF where I provided this table name. So I know which table I should retrieve the information. And as an output, I provide an object for the columns. And I can also provide the schema for the columns. That would be of type string, actually. And there is a definition inside the manifest. It's also something new where I say that the column schema is actually provided for the columns as a schema. The implementation, it's not hard. So I don't have much inside the init. It's actually nothing there. But inside the update view, each time the table name changes, I'm gonna retrieve the view. And when that's done, so I have the new columns, I'm gonna call the notify output change. This one will call the get outputs where I can provide the columns. And the schema for these columns, it's defined here. So I have an object with a value inside and an array containing call name, call display name, and call width. So let's see the implementation of this retrieve views. It's basically a fetch which I make on saved query. I retrieve there a column called layout JSON, and I filter so I can only get quick find query and return type code. I'm gonna filter on that too. So inside a PCF, as I have access to utilities, I can use the metadata and retrieve object type code. Using that, I can fetch the data. And after that, I have only one record where I get this attribute layout JSON, I parse that, and so I can provide now the name and the width. And since I'm in a PCF and I can use metadata, I'm gonna get the display name for that too. Now I can go inside a custom page and I'm gonna import this new PCF created, Dataverse search columns, which I'm gonna drag on the form, but we won't see anything there. It's only for the calculation. And there I provide a table name to be account. And now I can go to the Fluent details list and I'm gonna replace this table for the second data set with the result of my PCF. So that would be Dataverse search columns dot columns. That was the parameter defined in the PCF manifest. And you can see here the content. So I have dot value that was defined inside the schema. And there you can see I have the values for the column name. I have the column display name and the width, which are already defined inside my environment. So I can say then publish now. And if I refresh now the form, I can still work with a custom page. It's still filtering. And I have now the columns provided by the Dataverse information. If I change now my language to German and refresh the page, you can see that I have now the column names in German. So I haven't translated the custom page at all. It's everything provided from my PCF. Now, since I'm working with a PCF anyway, I've did a little more. I went to and defined another parameter called parent width. And there I'll provide the width of the details list. And that will give me the chance to calculate the rest of the place I have on the screen and divide it through columns so that the table will gonna take the whole screen. So you can see after refresh, I have the full screen there, and so I'm covering the full width. And I can still work there with a filter. But if I change the size of the screen, you can see that the screen is now responsive. So that's actually what I think what the Fusion development is about, to make the part which makes sense more in ProDev only there, and to use the low code whatever it's possible, and to take the best of two words. So thank you very much. And you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And also you can see all the examples from today on my blog site and YouTube, and of course on my GitHub. Thank you very much.
Welcome back. Honestly, I can hear Diana talk about anything for hours. Did you like the creator kit thing she talked about?
Oh, I loved it.
Pretty
yes.
interesting, right? I find it really useful just to get started with random projects here and there. Speaking of getting started, hopefully you've all been watching the news and you're seeing there's a little bit of a topic called OpenAI that's been, sweeping our industry, and honestly every industry, for the last few months. And today we've got special guest Julia Casper here to show you and us how to do OpenAI meets low code. Over to you.
Awesome, thank you, Donna. And yes, you're so right. Over the last couple of weeks, social media feeds have been flooded with conversations about ChatGPT and OpenAI. So today, we want to look and see how we can integrate OpenAI's technology and the Microsoft Power Platform and empower our Power Platform developers, and how they can use this technology and build super cool use cases for themselves. So let's start. What is OpenAI? OpenAI, first of all, it's a company. It's a research company and deployment company. They provide a bunch of public available APIs and grant access to their super powerful and AI-trained models using these APIs. So for today's session, we want to focus on one OpenAI API and build a next-gen application using Microsoft PowerApps with it. So let's have a look at those public APIs first. For this, we can just simply scroll through the documentation here, and we can see an API reference documentation here. So for today's use case, we want to focus on the create image endpoint. So first of all, the create image endpoint is an API that uses the underlying model called DALL-E 2, which is basically just another version of GPT-3. So now is the question, how do we get from here to the Microsoft Power Platform, and how can we use this endpoint within the Microsoft Power Platform as well? So most importantly, we want to think about it in a secure and governed way. This is why we are introducing or using Azure API Management as our API gateway service to provide a consistent and secure access to our backend services. And in our use case, an OpenAI API. So first of all, we have to import or add the API to our Azure API Management instance. As you can see, Azure API Management supports a bunch of different types of API. There are a bunch of different ways how to import this API to your instance. For example, you can also just import it using one of your existing Azure resources as well. So for our use case, we just simply manually added the OpenAI endpoint to our Azure API Management instance. All of this documentation can be found here, and we simply just added it and filled out the manually HTTP API form here. So I went ahead and added this API to my Azure API Management instance, and I added the operation create image here. So using Azure API Management, I'm able to modify the request before it goes out to our backend service using a bunch of different policies. So policy help us modify the behavior of the API, and it even lets us add extra security layers on top of it. So in my use case, I added a policy called set header here because I don't want to worry about authentication, and by modifying the API's header, I'm able to pass along an API key, so authentication just works, and I also don't have to think about it or worry about it from a Microsoft Power Platform perspective as well. So now that we configured and set everything up here, we want to test it in the Azure portal as well. For this, I can quickly hit the test tab right here. And before I'm hitting the send button, you can see for me being able to successfully call the API, I need to first define a request body because my API endpoint needs a bunch of parameters for me to work. So all of this can be also configured in Azure API Management. And you can see I added a bunch of different properties that my endpoint needs. So now that I configured this, I will quickly just hit the send button here. Let's wait. It's always the beauty about a live demo, but perfect. 200, everything worked, and I can see the response here in my body as well. So now that we tested in the Azure API Management portal, we want to expose it to the Microsoft Power Platform. For this, I can easily use the Power Platform tab right here and create a so-called custom connector. I can choose whatever API I want to expose to the Microsoft Power Platform, and I can choose which environment I want the exposure or the integration to work with. So as soon as I hit the Create button, a so-called custom connector will be available on the Power Platform side. So a custom connector, as we learned before during Daniel's session, is basically just a wrapper around a REST API. And in our use case, it's a wrapper around the OpenAI API. So as you can see, as soon as this has been successfully created, I can find my custom connector via the Custom Connector tab in the Microsoft Power Platform. I also want to test it within the portal here. So I can quickly jump to the Testing tab here. And as you can see, all the configurations I did on the Azure API Management side are now reflected in the Microsoft Power Platform as well. And the request body gives me indication what the API endpoint needs for my call to be successful. I can also switch to the raw body here, which I will do. I will copy the parameters from my documentation page and hit the test operation button. So you can see it's loading, fingers crossed. And I'm getting a 200, perfect. And my body response is here as well. So now that we tested it on the Power Platform side as well, we want to see what this looks like in action in an actual Power App. So for this reason, I built a very simple application in Power App kind of to showcase what this OpenAI can do. So first of all, I need to add my custom connector to the Power App itself as well. Just make sure via the Data tab, you've added the custom connector here as well. And now you are able, as the Power Platform developer, to use this functionality here as well. So in my use case, I want to, every time I'm hitting the Generate Picture button, I want to make an API call. So for this, I just simply reference the custom connector's name. I reference the operations name, and then in the brackets, adding my request body, depending on the variables I want to pass along with my call. So let's see what this will look like in action. Because I know yesterday was Valentine's Day, let's see what OpenAI comes up with for a gift for Valentine's Day. Let's hit the Generate Picture button. You can see it's loading all the way up here. And perfect. I mean, I can see flowers, I can see jewelry. Maybe I should send my partner this app in the future so he can get some inspiration what to send me next year for Valentine's Day. But yeah, let's kind of recap what we learned today. So today we saw how we can integrate an open endpoint API with our Microsoft Power Platform here. We use this by using Azure API Management to add some extra security and to do this in a governed way. So now our citizen developers or even Power Platform developers, all of them can use the beauty of OpenAI and build their own pretty cool applications with it as well. So now back to you, Donna.
Okay, I am freaking out, people, because that is cool. This is really, really cool. Actually, it's so cool. I would like to implement this in the top secret project I'm working on that my boss now knows about because I told all of you. But I want to move your solution to my environment, my team's environment. And I actually think our next presenters, Karthik and Casey, are going to show us how to do exactly that with ALM, Application Lifecycle Management. Over to you.
Hi, folks. Karthik Kanksabasan from the Microsoft Power Platform team, and I'm responsible for building all the relevant developer solutions that we're going to see today. Casey?
Hey, everyone. Casey Burke. I'm a principal product manager within PowerApps. I lead app lifecycle, so a lot of the application lifecycle management features we're about to show you today.
All right, so let's get into it. So here we are going to be talking about how we do ALM with Power Platform. Yes, I did say that. ALM, Application Lifecycle Management. And so our agenda today is kind of a little bit more fast-paced, and I'll be quizzing Casey with some ALM experience questions on what citizen developers can actually go do with Power Platform. So in the grand scheme of things, we'll try to help understand exactly what ALM actually means, and then try to take it to the next step and try to give the perspective of Power Platform in the context of application lifecycle management. And then we will go ahead and showcase a lot of these capabilities and how you can achieve ALM, if you will, from a lot of these different tools that we have to offer today. But before we get started, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. First of all, as you guys are watching this is already, it's February, and it is low-code February. We have tons and tons and tons of activities that are going on our GitHub site right now. So if you have the moment or chance to go ahead and to go to aka.ms, low-code February, I'd be very happy to see you guys participate there. And we'll be sharing all kinds of knowledge and know-how with key players from Azure, from Visual Studio, and from the Power Platform team, showcasing all their wares and capabilities that you can use to build wonderful and great applications in your organization. With that said, let's change gears into why we're here today. Application Lifecycle and Power Platform. So what is ALM? ALM is obviously short for Application Lifecycle Management, all right? And typically speaking, when we talk about Application Lifecycle Management, unfortunately or fortunately, lion's share of the attention is always taken by the deployment, because that is the main event. You take all the effort to go build the application, and then you proceed to go deploy that application. And that usually takes, as it should, the spotlight from all the others. But application lifecycle management in particular has seen its name evolve in different things and is referred to in different ways. There's obviously DevOps. There's also DevSecOps. Digital transformation is another way that application lifecycle management goes by. And then within application lifecycle management, these are the key constituents that are there. All right, you have application governance. It also includes the whole deployment aspect, as I mentioned early on. That's our diva. All right, and then we have software testing, and then maintenance of that application once it's deployed. But it's also about people, process, tools, and the purpose. One thing to be very clear, software development lifecycle is also part of application lifecycle management. It looks at the entire lifecycle of the product in that question. Well, what does that mean from a Power Platform perspective? It comes down to three key things. And please, Casey, you let me know if I'm veering off on the deep end here, right? But if we were to look at Power Platform in particular, right, it comes down to three things. It's environment strategy, all right? So exactly how many environments are you going to have, whether it's dev, test, prod, or dev, test, pre-prod, and prod. Everyone has a kind of strategy. In addition to that, when we talk about environment strategy, depending on how people want to go develop. So how do you want to create the dev environments with the appropriate configurations and so on and so forth, that can then be consistently deployed to various different target environments. Then that. The other thing is obviously every resource that you go ahead and build in a Power Platform app has to be packaged into a solution context. All right. So whether it be your flows, your apps, your bots, all these things get packaged that way. And then the third piece from a Power Platform perspective is actually getting the thing to deploy. And then so in this case, what we're going to focus on, a lot of our discussion is going to be focused on how we get this deployed from one environment to the other consistently and repeatably. All right. But there are some fundamental pieces that we're going to talk about a little bit more here. So Casey, tell them what is a solution?
Yeah, so think about a solution as a package. And so it's a container that you put all the different assets in that make up your application. So for example, I might have a Canvas app in there. I might have a model-driven app in there. The sitemap, which is the app's navigation, all the tables it uses. And then for the developers, I might even have things in it like custom connectors or C# plugin code that I'm going to deploy.
All right. And are there any kind of consideration one has to look at when we look at deployment in this context?
Yeah, so think about there's two types of solutions really. So within your development environment, you're going to be working in an unmanaged solution. So think about this as an unlocked solution. It's where you're adding your files, you're editing everything. And then when you're ready to go ahead and deploy it to, say, a downstream environment, you want to go to your quality assurance environment or to production, we're going to package that up. We export it as managed. And then that becomes our sealed binary, essentially, that you actually deploy to the other environment.
So it kind of becomes a kind of immutable unit, if you will.
Exactly.
That we want to go deploy. So that's one of the key things there, right? Is that you have the ability, typical software development paradigms that we've all grown up in and building applications don't go away because you're using low-code applications. You still have those same set of paradigms, and you also make sure that when you deploy these assets in target environments, they get deployed in an immutable way so that they're not. Obviously, we don't want to go do bug fixing or maintenance in prod. So we want to be able to avoid that as much as we can.
Exactly.
So that said, there's also a school of thought that believes in the fact that, well, when you deploy anything, it has to be persisted into source code. Well, they're not wrong. And there are two ways that we support these capabilities, right? One, you can export the unmanaged solution and just persist that into source code. And every time that you take from source code and deploy to a target environment, you package up the constitution as it is, and then deploy to the target environment as the case may be. The other school of thought is you not only export the unmanaged solution, but also export the managed solution together and persist them directly into source code. And then from there, as and when appropriate, you take the unmanaged and deploy that into a target environment as it may require. And then instead of having to repackage everything and rebundle it, just pick the managed solution from source code and just deploy that to the target as well. So there are those schools of thought that are there. And who are we to tell people that they're wrong? We have the ability to go do that. And if you want to audit if your audit systems require these kind of practices, you're more than welcome to go do so. All right. Some other patterns that we see from a team perspective, obviously, as I mentioned, all right, that we have, you do your regular sprint planning that you have, figure out what the appropriate environment strategy is, and then from there, figure out exactly how the considerations regarding managed and unmanaged solutions and the dependencies that you're importing are always considered to be managed. Because remember, this is just like any other DLL that you're using. So as you're building your app, and if you're dependent on other apps, those dependent apps should be managed. All right, because what you don't want is those dependent applications or dependent libraries that you may be using change as you're developing your application, as the case may be. All right. Now, in addition to that, you can go ahead and figure out, when you're dealing with source code repositories, how do you want to persist your Power Platform application? All right, is it a single repo, multiple repos? Figure out what the branch strategy that you have. Some people want to go ahead and branch in when they go put things in source code repositories, depending on the different environments they go target. All right, that's a common ask. You have specific PR loops that you want to be able to go do that need to be merged by your underlying source control management system, and also figure out exactly how you want to work when multiple developers are involved in this context. And one thing, because we're talking about people, all right, communication is key. So now, once we've done that, we then go ahead and package our capabilities. So in this case, we build the appropriate pipeline so it can be queued in, all right? And then we perform the basic L1 or L0, L1 tests as it is, package up our solution, run solution checker, and I can't emphasize how important that is. When you're deploying this to your target environment, the assets into your target environment, run the solution checker because it will at least save you a lot of grief before you deploy. And last but not least, publish the artifact. And that's how you do your typical continuous integration capability there. So now that we've gone ahead and laid the groundwork, let's kind of change gears a little bit. So here, we're going to now start talking about Azure DevOps and Power Platform. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you, for those folks that are Azure DevOps users, you have nothing to worry about. We use the exact same constructs that you're so used to in building your Azure DevOps pipelines. The only difference is the output that you're using or that gets deployed is actually a Power Platform app. Now let me go ahead and show that to you in a little demo here. All right? All right, changing screens. All right, so here I've got a little app that I'm currently using, and it's a little mixed reality app. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you. And right now, one of the key things is, as part of that environment strategy point that I mentioned early on, as did Casey, I'm sitting in my dev environment here. Okay, so I'm now going to go ahead and click on, just go ahead and edit my app here, just to show the fact that this is a full-blown app. It's a mixed reality app, and I'm a big aficionado of the Smithsonian in particular. So we're going to see some artifacts that we can play around with and see how that all functions in this context. And then we'll look how this app works. All right, so here's our app. And one of the things you'll notice if I select here on Power Platform, you can see I've got a couple of SharePoint assets where my pictures are. And then I'm also talking to the Smithsonian 3D API, which is a public endpoint that you can go ahead. So a shout out to the Smithsonian folks. Here you go. All right. And if I go ahead and click, let me just go over here. And I'm a big fan of George Washington. So if I go click on that, here is the George Washington statue that's at the entry point of the Smithsonian. And I can now look at it in a 3D context. It's a mobile app that I've got rendered. Look at that. See that right there. George Washington's actually surfing. All right. So here we go. And now I'm going to go exit out of this. So this is the app that we're now. So we know this app works perfectly fine in our dev environment. Okay. So what we're going to go do now is go to Azure DevOps. So here we are in Azure DevOps. And now I've got my pipelines already defined here. So let's look at one. I've got one here that says Power Platform Get Solution. All right. So let's go look at this here. All right. And for those of you who don't know how to get these activities, these are actually Power Platform build tools. It is available in Azure DevOps Marketplace. So you can go into Azure DevOps Marketplace, search for Power Platform build tools, and then install them directly into your org as is. What that does is that you can go ahead and create various different jobs right from here itself. And you can look at Power Platform. All right. And you see all these different tasks that are now available to you directly in Power Platform. Now, for those of you who are YAML inclined, all right, you can also go ahead and look at the YAML script right here itself, and that's available here as it is, okay? So you can choose either or you can just go ahead and write the whole thing in YAML and suck it into Azure DevOps Pipeline. Either way works, okay? So one of the things I do impress upon a lot of folks is when you're using Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions, please use the service principle. This is a good practice. As a former DevOps engineer, I've got scars to prove it. All right. Using username and password, generally speaking, especially when you have multi-factor authentication enabled, will break your pipelines. All right. So that, just a word of caution there in that context there. All right. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead here. I'm exporting the solution. I go ahead and unpack. Yes, the export that you have coming out of Power Platform is a zip file. Ideally, please don't use tools like Expand Archive or things like that to expand it, because it's actually, it can mess up the dependencies as such. So ideally speaking, use the tools that are available there. I mean, Casey, what do you think?
No, exactly. And I mean, that's it. So the solution unpack tool, solution packager, so you call it, it actually has special handling specifically for Power Platform solutions. So that's the right way to go.
Thank you. Phew, I feel validated. All right. So once we have that, we're going to check in everything into a Git system as it is, and voila, everything's going to work. All right. So what I'm just going to quickly go do is I'm just going to go run this pipeline here. It's just going to do a get solution. So I'll say run pipeline. And guess what? Because Power Platform build tools in Azure DevOps and the GitHub Actions are built on the Power Platform CLI, it is multi-platform out of the gate. You can run it on Linux. You can run it on Windows. You'll get the same set of results. All right. The only difference is the only pieces where you need Windows are when you're doing things like package deployments, or when you're going ahead and also doing data migration. Those depend on .NET 4.8. So for that, you need to be running in your Windows runners. But for everything else, it's pretty much fair game. Windows, Linux, doesn't matter. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and select run. And again, there we go. It's going to start off, go pick up a pull up a container to run my build. And it's going to start off, and it looks like a standard workflow. Again, from a DevOps engineer perspective, this is no different. Okay? Now, while that's going on in the background, I've already gone ahead and done some deployments as it is. All right? But just let's look at some of the key elements of the pipeline as it is. All right? So let's go back to our pipeline here. And I've got something called get from QA and deploy. All right? So what this is doing in this case is it's actually going to my QA environment, exporting the solution as a managed solution from my QA environment, and then running a checker on it, and then importing it into my prod. So let's look at that over here. Again, it looks like a very simple workflow, but it's doing a lot of complex operations as we speak. All right, so here in this case, I'm exporting it as a managed solution. So as you can see, I've selected that option here. I've gone ahead and run my solution checker, and I'm this time running the solution checker against my prod environment, okay, with my prod credentials. All right, so that's the other thing too. And then I proceed to go ahead and import into my target environment. So that's Azure DevOps for you. So as a developer, you're now able to, or a DevOps engineer, you don't actually have to do anything extraneous. You are doing what you're currently doing, except now the tasks you use are relevant to a Power Platform, and it just works. So now let's talk about GitHub and Power Platform. All right. So the same set of principles that I just showed you when it came to Azure DevOps also apply with GitHub. We do not want GitHub users to actually have to understand different concepts when going ahead and building applications that are targeting Power Platform. In this case, you still have events, you still have workflows, you still have jobs, and you have steps. The end result is the byproduct in this case is a Power Platform application that you now deploy to your various different target environments. Let's take a closer look at exactly how this looks like in the GitHub world. All right, so I'm going to go back and switch over to my GitHub environment here, as you can see. And I've got my source code here, and this time around, instead of going ahead and getting the solution, I already have the solution available locally here. All right. Now, one thing to note in GitHub, unlike what you saw in Azure DevOps with the classic editor where you have a more intuitive UI, within GitHub, everything is written based on YAML. All right. So here is the same thing I have there. I have a bunch of steps here where I'm defining all the different variables right within my YAML. A set of environment variables, and as you can see, I'm still using service principal here as an authentication mechanism for my service. And again, over here, I'm going ahead and making sure that I've authenticated properly to the backend system, exporting the solution into a target environment, unpacking it, and then running a bunch of Git commands to go check it into my Git repo on GitHub. Now, simultaneously, unlike what I had in Azure DevOps, I've got one pipeline that does packaging everything else, putting it into QA, getting the managed solution out, and immediately taking that and putting that into my prod environment here. And the same principles apply. All right, so I have two jobs. One job is saying convert to manage. All right, and I've got it listed over there, same thing. packaging my solution from source, running the solution checker, all right, importing it into my target environment, all right, and presto voila, I'm ready. It's now ready to be staged. So it's now being put into the staging area as a managed solution, which can then be picked up from the artifact store within GitHub. Now, what the artifact store in GitHub is, it's a temporary area in the runner as a file system where we can just go fetch things. You don't have to check it in or do anything of that sort. It just stays there. It's a file system object. So I'm now just going to go pick it up and then import it. Now, what I have gone ahead and done is, in my actions view, when I go kick these things off, I already have this thing running here. Or I actually ran it. It took me a while because it was a pretty hefty solution that I was deploying. All right. But as you can see, it looks the same way. All right. And this was running on a Windows runner on GitHub. All right. In the Azure DevOps world, we were running it on Ubuntu. So in this case, same principles apply here. But again, as you can see, these are all the different elements in which you can actually do the deployment in a much more in a seamless fashion when it comes to Power Platform. Now, obviously, it is not for the faint of heart, especially if you come from the citizen world. And that's something that has actually kind of pained us a lot. Wouldn't you say so, Casey? I mean, how do citizen developers actually, how are they able to value add?
It can be a little overwhelming for sure.
Exactly. So what I'm now going to go do is I'm going to pass it over to Casey to kind of talk to some of the other capabilities that we're building on Power Platform when it comes to citizen developers.
So if you haven't heard yet, we recently announced pipelines within Power Platform. So think about this as in-product ALM capabilities. And so we'll jump over here, and a lot of the problems that we were trying to address with this. So Kartik just showed you the amazing build tasks that we have set up within Azure DevOps and GitHub. And no, but it is massively powerful though. And what Kartik showed you was just the tip of the iceberg, really. But really it can be a lot, right? And we can't send citizen developers there. And on the other side of the spectrum, we've had a very basic experience, to manually export and import solutions, which works pretty well for a lot of scenarios, especially just infrequent, export, import. But really as you kind of step things up and you want to put more governance and rigor around that, and really you want to scale it out to some of your larger scale projects, you're going to want to put some automation behind it. And so really we're trying to bridge those two gaps so that everyone can work together within the same deployment experience. And in the future, it'll actually work with the existing stuff that you have already running in Azure DevOps and GitHub and make it a lot simpler even. And so this is broken out into 3 different experiences for different personas. So I'm going to start with a demo here in a couple minutes, but we're going to start with an admin type persona. And so it just takes a couple minutes actually to go ahead and build out a fully working pipeline that handles...
I can speak from experience, all right? Setting up a pipeline in Azure DevOps takes time, all right? So that's kind of cool.
And the configuration is just very minimal, right? And so everything else is just handled in the product already, like your connections, your environment variables. You don't have to worry about configuring anything else to go ahead and do that. And then we're going to switch personas to the citizen developer. And so right within the PowerApps or the Power Automate portal, working in your solution, you can just click a couple buttons and it carries out an automated deployment to the target
You're a man after my heart, because that's usually the biggest thing that pains me is like, how do I articulate to citizen developers what the heck a pipeline means in the first place?
Right. And so it can be kind of educational like that too, and just kind of outline the steps they're supposed to go through for a standard SDLC type process, right? But we also can't forget about the pro developers, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so fairly basic what you see in the preview, but we're going to be extending this out, and I should say your team will be extending this out, Kartik.
Thank you.
But there's a lot more coming in the works, and so actually a lot of what Kartik showed as far as within the different build pipelines within Azure DevOps, for example, all the different tasks that you have to orchestrate within that, we've abstracted that out. And so we've made it more outcome focused. And so you don't have to worry about all those inner workings, exporting the solution, unpacking it, all those mechanics. It's just, I want to deploy my solution. And
Wait
so
a minute, we put a low-code interface on top of DevOps? Now that is cool.
On a command line.
I know.
So just to go over kind of the basics really quick of how this works. And so we have a host environment that is going to store all your configuration and run history for the pipelines, as well as your artifacts. Within this, we define a pipeline. And so a pipeline is going to have multiple different dev environments linked with it, and it'll be accessible directly within any of those environments. Then you create all the different stages. So this is your test stage that's going to deploy to the test environment, or your production stage, for example. And then the artifacts or your solutions is really what you're going to be pushing through the pipeline for the deployment. And what's coming very soon, we're working on it right now, is the ability to extend these stages. And so think about wiring up a Power Automate Cloudflow, and then you can run your own custom logic, and it's incredibly powerful. The different connectors we have interacting with Azure DevOps or GitHub if you need to, or any other type of processes that you want to run. But you can, as a professional developer, you can also write C# plugins to do some of your deeper integrations, to run things like synchronous logic, whereas Power Automate would be just async only.
Maybe you want to also clarify the fact that this is not supposed to be a replacement for Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions, correct?
Exactly. And so really, we aim to do about 80% or solve about 80% of use cases in product, but that 20% can be a lot, right? And so we're not quite there yet for sure, but in the fullness of time, I should say.
All right, perfect. Well, I'm now excited.
So we're going to go ahead and jump over to the demo now. So now you can see I'm in my development environment working on the solution. And you can see that pipeline that was just built show up here. And of course, if I had access to multiple pipelines, you'd be able to select those and run them as well. And so now it's just a couple clicks really to carry out an automated deployment. There's a couple things that we need to check first. First, we're going to start pre-validating the solution against the target environment, which is really cool. We've never been able to do this in the past. So if there's missing dependencies in your solution, if you're violating DLP policies, those types of things, we're going to check and make sure that the appropriate guardrails are in place and detect things before your pipeline fails during the import, which is much too late. So now you can see after the validation passed, then it's going to go ahead and automatically sign me into my connections in the target environment. So for anything that's Azure Active Directory based, then it just uses single sign-on.
I'm just salivating just watching this. So this is amazing. And you get a green check mark there too.
makes you feel better.
Oh yeah, gives you the warm and fuzzies.
And if your solution does have environment variables too, you can go ahead and enter them here just like you would on the manual solution import. And so we're going to enter QA for this one. We'll go ahead and select the SharePoint site and list. I'm going to connect to a different site and list in my app in the QA environment. So we're going to specify different values for those parameters. And I can change the solution version here if I want to that I'm about to deploy. And then from there, you just click deploy. And it's going to go ahead and carry out the full end-to-end deployment. So think about all those underlying tasks that a DevOps pipeline was showing earlier, as far as exporting the solution, downloading it somewhere, and then importing it to the target environment. Only difference is this one is not unpacking it into source control, obviously.
So that's the piece that's kind of missing. It's all everything is now just self-contained within the Power Platform environment, so it doesn't have to actually go outside the environment like it does with a source code repository.
Yeah.
All right, got it. So while this is going on, I'm assuming, just like the way versioning happens of source code repository, there's a versioning mechanism here that kind of gives you an idea of all the different prior runs that have actually happened and the different versions that have gotten deployed, and that's all contained within the system itself?
Exactly. So that host that I was showing at the beginning actually is going to store all the different versions of your solutions, as well as a full log of who deployed the solution, who the owner of the solution is, the target environment that it went to, and a ton of other details that you might want to see about it. So instead of me talking about it, why don't I just jump over and show you?
Please do.
So we're going to go back into the app where I configured the pipeline. And you can come down here and see all the different run history. And granted, this is a new demo environment, so there's not too much data in there already. But you can go ahead and see that deployment I just submitted, and looks like it actually just succeeded as we're talking.
Beautiful.
And what's really cool is you can actually visualize this in Power BI, so it kind of gives you a holistic view of all the different deployment activity across your organization. So you could set this up either for a project, or you could even set it up across your entire tenant if you wanted to, and use this as the control plane for all deployment activity in your tenant.
Bar chart, yes. But this is great. This is awesome, Casey.
So let's go ahead and jump back. And now you can see that that completed. And that run history as well, you also can see that directly within the Maker portal. And so say there was a failure or something happened, you can come down here and see it, and you'd see the full error log and be able to troubleshoot it.
Nice.
So now you can see that successfully deployed to QA, and I could go ahead and repeat the exact same thing for production. What's really cool about that too is if I started the production deployment, it's going to use the exact same artifact that was deployed to test. So even if I'm mucking with it in my development environment at the same time, working on the next iteration, it doesn't matter. It's going to use the previous deployed one to test that same artifact.
And it's consistent.
Yeah, because we stored it in the host, which is really nice to prevent any intermediate changes that might bypass your QA environment.
Nice, nice. So, well, there you have it. So within Power Platform, you can now deploy Power Platform applications using Azure DevOps, GitHub, and within the product itself, the capability to go deploy using pipelines for Power Platform. One last thing that we would like to go ahead and share.
So we also have a professional developer experience, right? And our goal was to simplify the lives of professional developers as well. And we have a ways to go still, but think about it as we've made things outcome focused versus having to worry about all the different tasks that you would have to orchestrate to actually do a deployment. And so all the different export tasks, connecting to different environments and then downloading the file, connecting to a new environment, importing the file. Instead, you just connect once to the host and you can run from the command line. You can just specify the solution that you want to deploy and the stage you want to deploy and the version. And from there, it just carries out the entire deployment on your behalf. So you don't have to worry about the actual tasks.
So I'll just put a word out to my ProDev community there. I'll download the latest version of the Power Platform CLI, and all the fun things that Casey just did on the UI can now be done directly through the Power Platform CLI. And as Casey mentioned, pipelines are now in preview. And before we sign off, here are a couple of resources that we'd like to point you to that are available on the website today. So we have things like our Getting Started, so when you want to get started with some low-code application development, hands-on lab for all the things that we demonstrated here, along with documentation how to get going with Power Platform pipelines. And as again, I'm going to repeat myself here again, but we have low-code February, so please participate. It's a very simple URL, aka.ms / please do, / low-code-February. Thank you all, and hope to catch you soon on the other side.
Thank you all very much. It's been fun.
Welcome back. Okay, so controversial statement. Ready?
Yes.
I think the Power Platform community is the best community in all of tech.
As all conversational or bad statements are, no, they are. They are absolutely the best community I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Pro devs, low code devs, everybody wants everybody to be successful, learn more, be powerful, and here we are.
I know, and I really do think that's why this Powerful Devs concept works, because there's nobody in the community who's saying like, oh, you're not low code enough or high code enough or medium code, right? That it's just not there, because this Fusion Teams concept, we know we need all the parts of the information stack to do this job.
Right.
Right. We're going to make pretty bad apps if we don't have the business expert on our team. That would suck. Yeah.
We've all, as I've been a developer for just decades now, and everybody's been doing this. We have that one app. We spent 6 months on it. We've done all the things. It works great. And nobody uses it because it didn't do the one thing they really wanted it to do and all that. So having that Fusion team where everybody's working together to just get the job done, help everybody be more successful and just move forward and get that work done. Really the most important part.
Yeah. Okay, so your takeaways for the day. What were 3 interesting things you thought that occurred to you, or you're like, I'm going to go use that today?
So the 3 things that really came to me was first in that Power Pages demo, clicking that button and just seeing it inside VS Code and being able to edit things there and have it be live. That was just always seems like magic to me when stuff like that happens. And really, the rest of it was just like we just saw with ALM. I am never happy until code is checked in. And I want it in source control. I want to be able to go back 6 months to see what I did. I want to be able to have those PRs, have those diffs, and more to the point, have those pipelines where I want to click the button and have it go to production. I don't want access to production. I want IT to have access to production, and I have access to dev. Separate that, let production be not my fault when it goes down, right?
So Greg really doesn't want to break low code in prod. So all of you should also want the same thing. Blame someone else for that. They're experts, right?
They are.
Like DevOps people are experts at DevOpsing, and we're experts at actually making the thing,
That's
not
right.
deploying it throughout the land.
Not the same people. And I'm
Not the
happy
same
they're
people.
there doing the thing so I don't have to.
That's exactly right. My favorite today were, first of all, I love the fact that Fusion teams are getting all this love. I loved seeing all the examples of people working together from all different parts of the tech stack to come together to solve problems, because that's the reality of product teams. So I love that all of the demos today were done in these like really beautiful pairs to solve problems. So that was my favorite. Absolutely love Julia Kasper's demo, of course, on how to embed OpenAI within the Power Platform. That is something I'm going to do today. She's got a blog post for it, by the way, which she's going to drop into my DMs. Julia, please drop into my DMs, because that is going in products like tomorrow.
Yeah, we need that like now.
Now, exactly. And then the third thing is, if you haven't tried Power Automate Copilot, go try it, because I do not like typing things into the little JSON box, so I find it very, very cool. And
Even
useful.
if we know how to build that stuff, like it really is like you explain it and it does the first hour of work for you, and now you can go and tweak and do all the things. Just
I
like
love
everything
something
to make
else.
it faster and
Like,
more powerful.
Something else be my first draft, right? Be my marketing intern. Just do it. Be my dev intern from last summer. That's the best, I think, most useful thing about OpenAI.
Definitely, definitely.
Okay, so we hope you've had a good event and you enjoyed this, but we're not letting you go without there being homework, because it's us. So my homework is going to be, you've been seeing Low Code February, right? And it's February, it's Low Code month. We've been doing this all month. So we really want you to check out the resources on aka.ms//lowcode-February. Tons of resources, lots and lots of really great demos, kind of like what you've seen today, and a bunch of interesting ways you can get more involved with the community, do the Cloud Skills Challenge, all sorts of things. So check out also the Low Code Revolution show, which is April's show, and she's got cool guests on there all the time, showing off like amazing things.
It's amazing what you can do even without the pro code, and we can just add more on top of that.
That's right.
Speaking of pro code,
Your
if you're
homework.
looking for more of those pro code resources for Power Platform, I want you to go out there, go to AKMS/PowerApps Dev Plan, get yourself a developer plan, absolutely free to go up there, create Power Apps, Power Automate flows for dev and test, push out your code, see how that works. And then what I really want you to do also is look at those pro developer stories. We have a bunch of stories out there, developers actually using the thing. Our latest one is from Gina. She's an actual nuclear engineer using the Power Platform to be more successful running all that nuclear stuff that she can't really tell us about, but she'll tell us about the apps. You should check that out.
I love that story. That's
is.
such a good story.
It's super
I had
fun.
no idea. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us. This has been a blast. Did you have fun today?
I had a lot of fun today.
I did too.
Yeah.
And I learned so much. We were over there taking notes like, didn't know that, didn't know that. What a good way to learn all about what's going on in the Power Platform
Right.
in one go.
It was fun, super a lot of fun. I know I'm ready to go out there and build a million more things, and well, I want you to.
Yes, we go forth, be powerful. Thank you so much.